here on CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Well, good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio on CBC, 89.3 FM, 990 AM on that app and on YouTube. It's -9 right now in Winnipeg. Today our high is going to be a not minus, look at that. Today our high is going to be above zero. We're going to hit 4 degrees with a clear sky in the city of Winnipeg. Over in Brandon, good morning to you. Clear, a high of 2 degrees for you this morning. And up in Thompson today, sun and cloud and a high of -13. So we are on with the morning show till 8:37 this morning. If you need us on the commute between now and then, it's 788-3093. Corey Funk's going to pick up the phone and cover the commute. Corey also directs the show. Good morning, Corey. Good morning, Abby Adiemi. Abby is our senior technician on the program and will be on the air covering weather throughout the show. So we'll hear from Abby. And Mr. Kevin Nipatebo. We don't hear from on the air, but there he is waving at you on YouTube. Kevin is our streaming producer on YouTube. Heather Wells is here also with news headlines. March 12th is a significant day for a couple of reasons. Where are you starting with the news, Heather?
Yeah, good. It has been 5 years today since COVID-19 was first detected in Manitoba. And on this anniversary, experts say the province still has a way to go to fully address the effects of the pandemic. That includes communication of health advice and more attention to mental health issues. So we'll hear more on that coming up. As well, it happened at midnight. Those 25% tariffs on Canadian imports of steel and aluminum to the U.S. now are in effect. Fears this latest skirmish in the on-again, off-again trade war with the U.S. will produce some casualties in the city of Selkirk. We'll hear that story as well in our next local news at 6:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Yes, so March 12th, 5 years since first COVID cases in Winnipeg. We're going to hear more about that as well. We're also going to dig into where we're at with our understanding and research into long COVID. So stay tuned for those interviews on the show in addition to the news. Plus, to the tariffs, March 12th, the steel and aluminum tariffs. We are going to hear this morning about building indoor hockey rinks in the United States. Now, that's something that's about to get a lot more expensive, and we have a Manitoba manufacturer that's involved in that business. So we're going to hear more about that and how this is going to impact one of the businesses here in our province. Stay tuned. It's all still ahead in Information Radio, of course, as our show's on for 3.5 hours, 2.5 rather. Let's get started, though, at 6.
Today on Q with Tom Power.
The Canadian producer Boy Wonder has made hits for Drake, Beyonce, Rihanna, Eminem, and now he's receiving the International Achievement Award at this year's Junos. So he came in to reflect on his career and talk you through some of his biggest hits.
Kind of like just throwing paint at the wall when I make music. It just kind of happens, you know?
That's coming up on Q, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Helen Mann. A 25% U.S. tariff on steel and aluminum is now in force, putting pressure on Canadian industry and tens of thousands of jobs. We're watching Ottawa to see how the government will respond. The CBC's Janice McGregor is in our Parliamentary Bureau. Janice, what do we know so far about how Canada is going to hit back?
Helen, sometimes the last-minute brinkmanship of this trade war has resulted in a reprieve. This time it has not, at least not yet. But the difference between this week and the last round of tariffs that went on is that Canada and Mexico are not alone this time. All steel and aluminum entering the U.S. has now jumped dramatically in price. There are no more exemptions for essential goods in America. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said that in his phone conversation with Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc late yesterday, they discussed how the federal government will be responding today dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. But exactly what that means, whether it's increasing the rates on already tariffed products, adding to the list, or responding with non-tariff retaliation, that is going to have to wait for an official announcement this morning. The government has known for several weeks this could happen, but in any retaliation, it tries to proceed very carefully as what it announces becomes an extra cost for Canadian industries and consumers. And as of late last week, no exemptions to the retaliatory tariffs already in place have been approved for Canadian businesses.
And in the midst of all of this, of course, Mark Carney's still not sworn in as Prime Minister. He's still putting together his team. So how does that affect his response?
The Prime Minister designate is set to visit with steelworkers in Hamilton today. That is an obvious message of solidarity. Yesterday, he was briefed by Canada's ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, as well as the new fentanyl czar that's working with the Americans on border issues. On social media, he called the latest tariffs an attack on Canada. He tried to reassure Canadians that the government's response is going to have maximum impact in the U.S., minimal impact here, while supporting workers. But he said Canada's tariffs will continue until the Americans show us respect and commit to free and fair trade.
Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he will meet with Mark Carney today and speak with the rest of the country's premiers. Then he's travelling to Washington tomorrow with Federal Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc to meet with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. Let's go to Sarah Leverett in Washington. Sarah, what is expected from this meeting?
They'll discuss tariffs, yes, but mostly on the table will be the renegotiation of the free trade agreement. Ford describing it as Lutnick extending an olive branch. President Trump shocked the steel and aluminum industries of Canada, saying tariffs will be 50%, not 25%, blaming Ford's move to slap a 25% surcharge on electricity from Ontario to some states. Ford, after taking a phone call with Lutnick, relenting based on the fact that Lutnick agreed to bringing those tariffs back to 25%.
Now that these steel and aluminum tariffs are in effect, what kind of reaction is there in the U.S.?
Well, it was really a chaotic day yesterday in terms of reaction, with insiders just trying to follow the bouncing ball. But some have said they support Trump. 9 steel CEOs have been public about it, urging the president to, quote, stand strong on behalf of American steel. Others, though, disagree, saying the integration of the two industries in Canada and the U.S. is robust and that this 25% tariff only hurts both countries. Dave Wasira is with the United Steelworkers in the U.S.
We've seen this under the last Trump administration, where these tariffs that don't make much sense have hurt people in their pocketbooks, have hurt people with their families and how they feed them. This round, I'm sure, will be no different, just worse.
And let's not forget, we have more tariffs coming. April 2nd is when the 25% on many Canadian goods is set to come into effect. That is, unless Trump changes his mind.
CBC's Sarah Levitt in Washington. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
The European Union is also facing new steel and aluminum tariffs from the United States, and it is mounting a response. Counter tariffs on 26 billion euros worth of U.S. goods. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that is proportionate.
We firmly believe that in a world fraught with geoeconomic and political uncertainties, it is not in our common interest to burden our economies with such tariffs.
Europe's counter tariffs begin April 1st. Some Canadian politicians are venting their tariff frustrations in Texas. Business reporter Kyle Bax is at the Global Energy Conference in Houston.
On stage in the heart of Texas, there's no delay in Canadian politicians being pressed about the trade war.
Where to start? Tariffs. Right.
A brief moment of levity. The trade war is leaving Alberta Energy Minister Brian Jean disgruntled.
You know what? I don't think friends do that to friends.
The tariffs against Canada keep changing and escalating. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe.
I can understand that you might be upset with the current situation, but you can't be angry and smart at the same time. And we need to be smart.
The Canadian politicians are in the Lone Star State at a global energy conference, looking to promote their provinces and attract investment. In an interview, Federal Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says the government is retaliating for a reason.
People of Canada actually expect that their government is going to step up and respond. That they're not going to, expect their government simply to be a patsy.
He met face-to-face with his counterpart, U.S. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright. Wright used to lead an oil company that did some work in Alberta.
I think it was a useful conversation, and I'm hopeful that he will be a voice for trying to find ways to de-escalate and eventually get these tariffs removed.
For now, the tariffs against Canadian oil and natural gas are largely gone, said Wilkinson, a rare bright spot in the trade war. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Houston.
The Bank of Canada is set to make its latest interest rate announcement today. Several economists are predicting the central bank will once again cut its key lending rate. The question is by how much, given the current trade war with the United States. If the rate is cut by another quarter of a point, it will bring the key lending rate to 2.75%. BC's energy minister says the Columbia River Treaty renegotiations have stalled under the new Trump administration. The agreement regulates everything from flood control and power generation to water supply and salmon restoration in BC, Washington, and Oregon. As Yvette Brand reports, the delay is stirring fears the U.S. might want more control over water.
Vicious anti-Canadian attacks that have been made on us on all these issues, and they do cause concern.
Energy Minister Adrian Dix says the stalled renegotiation is a troubling snag in efforts to modernize the 61-year-old cross-border agreement. A new agreement that offered Canada a better deal was reached but not finalized before Donald Trump took office. Barry Penner is a lawyer and a former BC Environment Minister.
It stalled out, and now, unfortunately, it seems to be caught up in some of this more general hostility being expressed by the Trump White House towards Canada.
Back in September, Trump's talk of a Canadian faucet of water sparked fears about his plans.
And they have essentially a very large faucet.
Now his calls for Canadians to join the U.S. as the 51st state further concerns about U.S. designs on Canadian resources.
And our interests every single day, and no amount of bluster is going to change that.
But Dick says calls to charge the U.S. more for power won't work.
And I don't think the effective strategy when people are threatening your country, threatening your sovereignty, is to punch yourself in the face.
Premier David Eby has urged Dix to look for effective ways to discourage U.S. threats. Yvette Brand, CBC News, Vancouver.
Russia's foreign minister says his country will not accept any peace deal that includes the presence of NATO troops in Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov says any ceasefire cannot jeopardize the lives of Russians. Lavrov is reacting to an interim ceasefire agreement proposed by the U.S. and Ukraine. Delegates from both countries met in Saudi Arabia yesterday to forge a path to end Russia's war in Ukraine. But top Russian lawmaker Konstantin Kosachev released a statement today. In it, he says any agreement will be on Moscow's terms, not Washington's. NASA's newest space telescope is about to start mapping the entire sky.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
Spherex and Punch on their way to map out our universe like never before and revolutionize space weather forecasting.
The Spherex Observatory was launched last night from California. It will survey the Earth every 6 months from an orbit over Earth's poles. Infrared instruments are expected to provide a sweeping, wide-angle view of hundreds of millions of galaxies and their shared cosmic glow. And that is the latest national, international news from World Report. For news anytime, go to cbcnews.ca. I'm Helen Mann. This is CBC News.
It's 6:10 a.m. is the time right now. Are you up? Are you flossing your teeth? I'm Marcy Marcusa. Good morning and welcome to Information Radio on CBC 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and on YouTube. Well, why am I talking about flossing your teeth? Because this hour on our medical column, Dr. Bardwaj is going to talk about the importance of doing so, and it has more to do with, your overall health than just your dental health. So we're going to talk about the link to heart disease if you're not flossing. So that's coming up just before 7 o'clock. Also this hour on the program, you might have heard from farm to table, but what about from tree to table? There's a local event coming up where you could be involved in milling salvage trees into lumber. So we'll hear about that. And yes, we're going to talk tariffs. Another Bank of Canada rate cut is expected today, albeit a small one, but then also we have the tariffs coming in on steel and aluminum. So what is all of this going to mean? We have an economist on this hour to talk about what might come next as the targets continue to shift. Right now, let's go to Heather Walls, who's live in our news center. Good morning, Heather.
Good morning. Well, fears the latest skirmish in those on-again, off-again trade war tariffs with the U.S. will produce casualties in Selkirk. Gerdau Steel is one of the biggest employers in that city of 10,000. 70% of the steel produced there is shipped to the United States. Terry Shaw at the Canadian Manufacturer and Exporters Group says the impact of heavy tariffs could be incredibly damaging for Selkirk and the surrounding areas if hundreds of people lose their jobs. Former Manitoba PC leadership candidate Shelley Glover says she is trying to form a new political party in this province. It would be a conservative alternative to the Manitoba Progressive Conservatives. We'll tell you why she feels she has to do this coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
We are going to ask on Facebook. Actually, I just posted this on Facebook. So my Marcy Marcusa page acts as a show page, you might know, during the show. So 5 years ago today, as Heather was mentioning, Manitoba's first COVID-19 case. How has your life or your business changed? Maybe it's changed your family. Maybe it's changed health in some way. Maybe your business took a hit. Maybe you went out of business. Maybe you grew your business in a new way. Who knows? Maybe it's just changed the way that you interact in the world. I don't know. I have hand sanitizer in my purse. It comes with me everywhere. And before we have a meal, we usually just sort of use it. It's just become a habit. I've got this little bottle that just stayed in there. Didn't do that before. So how are things changed from the small to the big for you 5 years since we had COVID first appear in Manitoba? If you want to call us, it'd be great to get some calls and insights on this morning. So the number to call is 204-788-3205. 204-788-3205. All right, let's find out what the weather is doing. We've got a change in that today. Hi, Abby.
Good morning across the province. We're looking at cloudy conditions down south in the Interlake region. Gimli and surrounding areas just seeing fog this morning. That should clear as you head into the day. While the north is experiencing colder temperatures with that wind chill still an issue. Looking at conditions in Winnipeg and surrounding areas at this time. Winnipeg at -9, cloudy out there. The skies will clear as the day goes on. We will notice light breeze with a high of +4 today, though. This morning, you might feel that wind chill around -14. And then for tonight, there's clear conditions you notice will be cloudy as we get to the midnight period. We should see some snow overnight into tomorrow morning, but that would end tomorrow afternoon. But for today, though, most of the province expect cloudy conditions, some clearing as the day goes on, while the southern regions will see light breeze and a chance of snow or freezing rain in some areas. But right now, Winnipeg, -9, warming up to +4 today.
All right. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Yesterday, Corey Funk, because it was so iced over in the yard, my bulldogs went out to try to pee, and they were like, I was worried they were displacing their hips because like every time their little legs would just go, like spread apart, and it was like they couldn't quite get a solid footing. It's really something out there.
That was the same thing with my toddler yesterday as well, actually. See, Daddy picked me up. He's like, wow.
I know.
Yeah.
It's hard to get a grip. How's the commute?
So far, I haven't heard of any major issues that I've heard of so far. It might be a bit foggy around Gimli, so just heads up there if you're in the highways in the Interlake area. But if you do see something going on, if you're walking, biking, driving, do be careful out there. It is a little bit slippery. That number to call, 204-788-3093.
Well, when a tree gets marked for death anywhere in the city, it comes down and then it leaves a hole not only on the boulevard, but often in our neighborhood as well, right? So you might miss looking at the tree from your home window or walking by it daily or being shaded by overarching branches and leaves. This weekend, there's an event that's going to give new life to some oak trees. Now, you might be able to get involved in milling them, in fact, yourself. Local company Anvil Tree is hosting a tree salvaging event. So up early and with the award for being in studio live, Peter Hargraves is here, the executive director of Anvil. Good morning.
Morning.
And Ren Bueller's here as well, who is also with Anvil. Hi there.
Good morning.
So tell me a little bit, before we get into the salvage event, Peter, tell us a little bit about some of the creative projects, because you're also the owner of, Sputnik Architecture. You guys are often involved in sort of reuse projects, sculpture, even art around the city and around the province.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed over the last 10 years working in community activation projects, especially in winter. So we do a lot of stuff with snow and ice, and Anvil Tree has kind of emerged out of the mist with those projects. And we now have a working studio workshop that we use as our base for all of these projects. So we do a lot of stuff with snow and ice in winter, and this opportunity with wood came up. So we're trying to apply the same principles of getting lots of people involved and turn it into something that's grander than just a little chunks of wood.
If people go to the website, in fact, on Anvil, they're going to see images of some of those projects. I know that Chris Panko is also part of Anvil and was in talking about a specific one, Ren, that was this, it was like a huge lantern. It was in Selkirk, and it was sort of built and thatched and then burned sort of on a winter evening. And then there's something called an ice chimney you've got photos of, like really creative things.
Yeah, so we had the opportunity a couple of times now to work with Holiday Alley in Selkirk for their event, and we do something called Straw Symposium, and this is based on a centuries-old tradition of building straw sculptures at change of season and then celebrating the change of these seasons with lighting them on fire, and we've had some great response from the community in Selkirk. So lots of great opportunities for artistic expression like that.
What is the philosophy when it comes to maybe I'll go to Peter on this one. When it comes to salvage and environmental stewardship, when you think about Anvil and your business commitment?
Well, really, it boils down to what are our resources. So, in wintertime, we get cold results in ice and snow, and so we have access to this incredible material. And so, for anyone that hasn't seen ice come out of our Red River, it's beautiful, crystal blue, clear ice. Like, it's perfect. It's stunning. And so we feel like we have these resources. We feel like we've been introduced to these resources, and now it's our responsibility to use them creatively. And so when Chris came up with the idea of doing straw sculptures in Selkirk, it was the same thing. Every fall we have all the straw, leftover byproduct of farming. And so there again, we just applied the principle of using it for something artistic. And we know that art works. We know that art inspires and intrigues and invites. It's sort of equitable and it creates opportunities for people to engage other senses. And so this is, these projects are just about engaging our senses and sort of maybe thinking about things in new ways, and we've really enjoyed exploring that. And so, again, if you start using that principle, then when something new comes along, it's like, oh, well, let's try this.
Is the ice that the ice chimney I've been describing, just the tall, sculptural? Did that ice come from the river?
No, that ice we harvested in situ on the south basin of Lake Winnipeg. And again, that was a derivative of us having like a horrible winter where we didn't have snow and ice, and the warming huts and the skating trail was only open for a little while. And we had this film crew coming in from Australia, and they wanted to kind of document what we were doing. And so we kind of invented a project. I had heard about this idea of creating a fire chimney out of ice. It's kind of like an oxymoron, but it ended up being stunningly beautiful. There were things we learned about.
We have images, actually, as you're talking about this,
you
Peter, that are up actually on our YouTube page, so people can kind of see what you're talking about too.
Yeah, so we had this chance to kind of put these things together that don't really belong together. Even cutting a hole in the ice and swimming in it doesn't look right, but then when you do it, it feels right. So we ended up having the guy from Australia jump in the lake and the guy from Vancouver jump in the lake, and they were kind of like, it was outer worldly being out on that terrain and playing like that.
So let's get to the lumber. Let's get to the trees. This event coming up, I think, next weekend. How many oak trees do you have? Like, where do they all come from, Ren? Do you want to speak to what's going to be happening at the event?
I would say that there's probably 20 plus lengths of oak that have been harvested. And as you mentioned, it's happening on Saturday, March 22nd at 9 o'clock in the morning. And we are looking at this as a kind of weekend course opportunity for people to come and learn how to mill wood. And they would get a slab of wood to take with them at the end of the day as well. And in the same way that we love to be involved in special building projects and art installations, one of our goals as a company is also to encourage others to be creative and to make things. And so this is kind of to spur them on to do that.
Are they Manitoba trees? They came from somewhere here or somewhere else?
They did. They came from Wildwood Park. I think Peter can speak to that.
Yeah, they're locally harvested. It was just an opportunity where an owner had to get rid of some trees. And they contacted a friend of ours, and so there's this kind of community of people. And then we contacted our friend Terrell Fraze, who has a wood mill, and this kindred spirits all come together. And suddenly we had a wood mill, we had some lumber, and we thought, okay, well, how can we put these things together? And
I love that you're helping people to learn how to do it a little bit as well. There is a cost involved. So that is the cost for the wood at the end, or is it the cost to register, or how is that going to work?
We're treating it like a registration cost and kind of a course. So, we're encouraging people to go on our or send an email to Ren, register, and then come on down on Saturday. We'll have coffee and refreshments, and then hang out and work for a little bit, and then take your slab of wood home and invent something with it.
And this is in Winnipeg. This is right outside your shop on St. Mary's, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Ren, what's your email? Because we're encouraging people to email you to get more information, right?
Exactly. Thanks. It's ren@anviltree.ca. That's REYN at anviltree.ca.
Perfect. Before you go, I have to ask you, Peter, because I know that you were recently involved in a CBC Radio Canada interview about climate change and the impact on festivals and outdoor arts events. And I'm just thinking this morning, we hear world leaders daily now who are pulling back from Paris Accord and some of the other things in the world. What are your thoughts on that, on the overall impacts and your biggest concerns in Manitoba?
Well, we have to remember the power of one. We have to remember that every one of us has a responsibility to do our best to be the best citizens we can be, and to be the best, as part of being a good citizen, it's how we treat our resources and our opportunities. So, this is a very local project, which is maybe fitting within the context of these ridiculous tariffs, and within the context of our environment. Nobody wants to see trees come down. These trees had to come down, so we're going to use them for their best and highest purpose. And I think that can be applied to everything we do.
Thank you both for being here early. Really interesting. I hope you get a lot of people out to learn how to mill, and obviously then to have that salvaged lumber to do something with. Nice to have you in studio, Ren.
Thank you so much.
And
Great
thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you. Yeah,
That's
bye.
Peter Hargraves and Ren Buehler, who are with Anvil Tree. So their milling event is coming up next weekend, and you can reach out to Anvil and you can email Ren at that email we mentioned, and that is at their shop out in on St. Mary's Road. Right now it is 6:24 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 a.m. on the app and on YouTube. Well, let's talk about what's happening with the big story today, which is the tariffs. So 25% American tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, they are now in effect. This is the latest move in another day. The Canada-U.S. trade war and the continuing economic uncertainty continues. All of this ahead of a scheduled Bank of Canada announcement, remember, that's coming this morning on interest rates. So to talk about how all this fits together, Jeff Rubin is with us. He's an economist and author of a new book called A Map of the New Normal, How Inflation, War, and Sanctions Will Change Your World Forever. And he's joined us via Zoom, which we appreciate. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So what is the latest, first of all, on Trump's tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum? Just in case people are just waking up, we're not looking at 50% this morning.
No, they originally were 25%, and then Premier Ford of Ontario, in retaliation, was going to slap a 25% export surcharge on electricity exports to Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. And Trump responded by doubling down and saying a 50% tariff. Ford's back down. Trump's gone back to 25%. There's probably a lesson there. But to just talk about the impact of 25%, because it's quite significant, you got to understand that 90% of all the aluminum produced in this country, most in Quebec, is exported to the U.S. market. About 50% of all the steel produced in this country, most of it in Ontario, is exported to the U.S. market. Without access to the U.S. market, these industries would not exist in Canada, or they certainly would exist in nowhere near the proportions that they exist today. So, 25% is a challenge.
I'm going to interject here just for a moment, if I may, Mr. Rubin, because I want to ask you about something you mentioned there before we move to interest rates and how this all fits together. But I want to ask you about, you said there's a message there, or no, a lesson there, when you said how Doug Ford responded.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, okay, the UK also faces a 25% tariff, but they didn't respond, and Trump didn't double down on them. Here's the message, and it's a message that most Canadians don't want to hear, but need to understand, that in any protracted tariff war with the United States, and it looks like we're heading that way, we are going to lose. We are going to lose for one very simple reason, that our economy is 3 times as dependent on exports than the U.S. economy, and 3/4 of our exports go to the United States. That's not to say that we couldn't inflict local regional pain through retaliation. We can, and we will. But in the broad economy-wide sense, the U.S. market is way more important to Canada than the Canadian market is to the U.S. And it doesn't matter if it's Mark Carney or Polavoy, Ford, the basic economics of that won't change. So to use President Trump's words, we're not holding the cards, but you got to deal with the hand you're dealt with.
And you're saying it won't matter if Pierre Poilievre wins this election and is dealing with Trump, or if it's Mark Carney, who has obviously the experience in financial and one could argue some of the relationships in financial circles. This is basically just we're the smaller player, whether we like it or not.
It's the basic economics, and that's what's going to carry the day, not the personalities. And, Trump understands this, that he's holding the card. So, what is a viable solution? In the short run, exchange rate depreciation. And we're going to see the Bank of Canada continue to try to engineer a lower Canadian dollar to take some of the bite out of U.S. tariffs. We'll see that today probably with another rate cut. It's certainly my 20-year experience as the chief economist of CIBC World Markets that anytime Canadian interest rates are lower than U.S. interest rates, the Canadian dollar is going to go down. We've already broken through 70. The problem with that strategy is that if we're going to offset a 25% tariff, and soon not just on aluminum and steel, but on all non-energy exports, we'd need to see, a roughly 50-cent Canadian dollar. Not only would that have huge inflationary implications, but it would leave all of us feeling a whole lot poorer. So in the long run, there's only one solution, trade diversification, but that's, a lot harder in practice, particularly since our geopolitical positioning, we're, a NATO ally, is at variance with our need to find new trading partners, because the countries that have the economic clout to be an alternative to the U.S., countries like China, Russia, India, the 3 fastest growing economies in the last 20 years, we don't exactly have great diplomatic relations with.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubin, for your analysis and for setting up the day for us as we'll watch what in fact happens with interest rates as well. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Take care.
That is Jeff Rubin via Zoom with us live on CBC, an economist and author of a new book entitled A Map of the New Normal, How Inflation, War, and Sanctions Will Change Your World Forever. He is also, as he mentioned, a former chief economist at CIBC World Markets. So we are awaiting that interest rate decision. We have business news coming up here right after your CBC Winnipeg news. We'll mention in traffic, it could be just a touch foggy around Gimli. Corey was just highlighting that earlier. But let us know how your highway drive is or what it's like for you on the streets of Winnipeg, whether you're walking or you're out there biking or maybe you're in your car. 788-3093 is the commuter line. Right now, your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30, it's -8. Those clouds are going to make way for sunshine in Winnipeg today. A high of 4. Canada's steel and aluminum industries are bracing for the impact of new American tariffs. Starting today, the United States is now imposing a 25% levy on all imports from all countries when it comes to steel and aluminum. Frank Crowder is president of the United Steelworkers Local 7135. He represents union members at National Steel Car in Hamilton.
It's very stressful for myself and for members. We really don't know what's going on. The biggest concern we have is the uncertainty.
The new U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum are separate from the first wave of tariffs the U.S. president announced last week. Meanwhile, the European Union is announcing countermeasures this morning. They take effect April 1st, targeting U.S. steel and aluminum, but also textiles, home appliances, and agriculture. Now, these new tariffs have some people in Selkirk fearing for their futures. One of the biggest employers in the city of 10,000 just north of Winnipeg is Gerdau Steel. Terry Shaw at Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters says the imposition of steep tariffs will be felt across the city.
If you look at the per capita impact of plant slowdowns, plant shutdowns, it's incredibly damaging. It's damaging not only to the employees and that employer, but to the town itself.
Shaw says the mill produces about $200 million worth of steel a year. Selkirk's mayor says about 70% of that is shipped to the U.S. You can hear the latest on tariffs as well as other national and international news coming up on World Report at 7. It has been 5 years since COVID-19 was first detected in Manitoba. And on this anniversary, experts say the province still has a way to go to fully address the effects of the pandemic. That includes mental health issues. Renee Al-Gabalawi is an associate professor at the University of Manitoba and a clinical psychologist at Shared Health. She says a surge in mental health issues early in the pandemic, by some accounts, has returned to baseline. But Al-Gabalawi says certain groups were more impacted than others.
Those who had a lot of economic instability or sustained long periods of isolation, or those with compromised health problems or chronic health conditions were at particularly elevated risk of ongoing mental health issues.
Al-Gabalawi says some people reported finding a silver lining, like the importance of social support. She says along with mental health, improvements are needed around surgery cancellations and delays. Well, 5 years later, lingering health effects of the pandemic are still being felt by those living with long COVID. Dr. Alan Katz is a family physician and health services researcher at the University of Manitoba. He says while most people's long COVID symptoms have improved or have been resolved, others are still experiencing symptoms of brain fog, physical weakness, and shortness of breath. Katz says finding treatment specific to long COVID can be difficult.
We're struggling in Manitoba with people not having access to primary care. So it would potentially be helpful to have a specific group of physicians and other providers who chose to provide care to those with long COVID. But it's really challenging work because it's a multidisciplinary, multi-organ system problem.
Katz says with no specific clinic in Manitoba to help, many long COVID sufferers have looked for care online or outside the province. Former Manitoba PC leadership candidate Shelley Glover says she is trying to form a new political party in this province. It would be a conservative alternative to the Manitoba Progressive Conservatives. Glover says the PCs can't shed the baggage from the former PC government's refusal to search Prairie Green landfill for the remains of murdered First Nations women, and then campaigning on that decision during the 2023 provincial election.
I do not believe that this party can recover. It certainly doesn't represent the conservative principles, values, ethics that I hold dear, and I strongly believe that we should be moving forward under a different party name, a different leadership, and that's what I'm working toward.
Glover says she quit the PCs in 2023 and can't support either candidate in the current PC leadership race. Still on top.
And it's 1-0 Winnipeg.
Vlad Nemesnikov in the first period on TSN as the Jets edged the New York Rangers 2-1 last night. Coach Scott Arniel liked the way his team played.
It was a hard-fought game. We know how desperate the Rangers are going to be, and we certainly saw that. And that was at times got into a little bit of a track meet going both ways, but both specialty teams had to obviously step up. And it was a good game, good goaltending.
Speaking of goaltending, Connor Hellebuck making 22 saves for Winnipeg, or 21 saves, I should say. Last night's was the Jets' 45th win of the season. Winnipeg still on top of the NHL standings, tied for first in the league with the Capitals. Next up, Winnipeg hosts Dallas on Friday. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
All right. Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
Got to get my jersey out. Let's get into what's happening in the weather forecast for the regions with Mr. Abbey.
Good morning once again. We're looking at chilly but improving conditions with some snow and freezing rain possible in parts of the province today. The southern regions will see cloudy starts, and then that will clear as we get into the day, while the north still remains cold with snow and icy conditions. For Winnipeg and surrounding area this time, we're seeing cloudy skies with temperatures around -9. The sun will try to make its appearance later. We then warm up to around +4. Expect a breezy day, and tonight we'll see some snow and a slight chance of freezing rain before we drop to around -4. That snow is going to continue into tomorrow. We should see about 2 centimeters once the system goes through. And similar conditions we're seeing in the Pembina Valley region, the Westman region, the Parkland region, and the Interlake region. Temperatures all hovering around -10, though Dauphin seeing light snow at this time and foggy in Gimli. But up north, we're seeing temperatures hover around -26, -27 in Thompson and Churchill. The wind chill feels like -39 this morning.
Do you guys remember 5 years since COVID in here, just before we look at the commute this morning, like in how things changed here on our newsroom floor here at CBC Manitoba?
Yep.
What are you thinking about, Corey?
I remember all the mic socks that we went through.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And when you'd walk in the studio, there was a strip that said, like, recently washed. And
disinfected.
Our poor tech supervisor lead, Brian, who had part of his job was washing mic socks.
Brian Harder, like every day you'd see him in here with a bucket and bleach. It'd be like he had all these mic socks. And,
Yeah.
because I forgot all about that. I have pictures, actually. I should post some pictures for later in the program of that. I wanted to chronicle the time, so those little strips that said disinfected.
And I just have a picture of Pat in my head when it runs in to do the weather and it takes off his mask to do the forecast.
Yes.
And then once it's done, it puts it back on because it's a mask on all the time.
Yeah.
And then we were maintaining that, distance amongst
Absolutely.
It was like, I remember that time.
Because for a portion of the pandemic, what happened to me, of course, is I got sent home. I got sent home pretty early because CBC had to come up with this emergency plan. It became, because remember at the beginning, we didn't know what COVID was, so we didn't understand a lot about it. So there became this national plan where it was like, okay, what will we do to stay on the air to impart health information to people? Because fundamentally, you turn into a service, right? We have a signal to reach people. And so these decisions were made. And so I know that early on I was sent home because part of the thinking was if we have to clear out the entire office and we have to have one program stay on, we'll look at morning because it reaches the most people in the market. And then we were trying to figure out how to keep everyone safe. And also then we had to make plans with Saskatchewan because they're our sister province in the prairies. So what would happen if Saskatchewan station had to shut down, or because there was a moment where, remember, we were being told, well, you might have to shut down all of your buildings. And so for a long, long time, there was no one here. During the morning show, when I was at my dining room table in those early weeks when we didn't know what was going on really even, Corey, I think you text some of those shows.
Yep.
And then it shifted to, as Abby's saying, it was Abby and Pat Kanuga and who were here. Because you can't do your job remotely. You have to be behind the board.
Unfortunately, I can't do remote. Yeah. And then, the fun side was hearing your coffee maker in the background.
Yeah.
And your husband as well.
Yeah. Jean-Paul got famous on the treadmill and when he was grinding the beans, right, for his coffee every morning. And I always tell this story just before we move on here. It's a cute one where when I was first figuring out how to wire up my studio at home, like set everything up, I didn't have everything properly taped down. And Doug, my dog, just came, waddling up like bulldogs do. And just while I was in the middle of a live interview, he tripped the wire, not enough to get us off the air, but enough so the mic was going and falling. So during the interview, I was falling with the mic and talking. And I picked it up and saved it. And then I held it for the rest of the interview, but nobody knew because I was at home. So I wasn't on camera. Anyway, all these little things. And I might have worn pajama pants a lot. Full disclosure. All right, let's get into what's happening if you're still sitting in your pajama pants and you're wondering about how you're going to have to dress, especially if you're walking today or waiting for a bus.
Yeah.
What's the commute like?
Grippy shoes. It's still slippery on those sidewalks, I can tell you that much. Otherwise, I haven't heard of any major issues out there on the highways or the roads. But if you see something going on or you don't see something because there might be some fog around Gimli, give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number, 204-788-3093.
All right, thanks, Corey.
Thank you.
Crystal Lee Ramlachan is here now with Business News. Good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Marcy.
It's obviously a big day. The U.S. 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. That was, though, after yet another chaotic day yesterday, back and forth with these threats.
Yeah, that's right. So earlier yesterday, President Donald Trump threatened to double that tariff in response to Ontario's tax on electricity it sends to the U.S. But after speaking with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Ontario Premier Doug Ford agreed to pause that tax until he has trade discussions with the administration in Washington tomorrow. Now, Ottawa says it will hit back because of all of this, but a spokesperson for Ford says Ontario will not put the levy back on, even though Trump is going ahead with these tariffs on metals. Now, the federal energy minister says Canada could impose non-tariff measures, such as restricting its oil exports to the U.S. or levying export duties on products. And analysts and economists say the tariffs will likely be felt profoundly by affected industries. Canadian Steel supports key U.S. industries, including defense, shipbuilding, and auto manufacturing. And one report says about 23,000 Canadian jobs are supported by steel exports. And the U.S. is Canada's largest market for aluminum. And, the European Union has also responded swiftly to these tariffs. The EU says it will impose counter tariffs on 26 billion euros worth of U.S. goods starting in April.
Later on this morning, we'll hear more. You might have heard about Selkirk, obviously, where we have a steel mill in Manitoba and how people there are feeling. Also, we're going to have a full interview with a manufacturer here who does some business in the U.S. that involves wire. And that will be something that will be affected because it's wire that helps, with hockey rink construction. So there's all these interesting products and things, and these ties that, it's going to impact. The tariffs also sent the stock markets in the tailspin again, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Canada's main stock index continued its losses yesterday, and U.S. markets also fell. So in New York, markets briefly fell 10% below records set last month. And in early trading yesterday, markets started to recover from Monday's slide. But, then they were sent lower when Trump threatened to double those tariffs on aluminum and steel. And however, though, markets started turning around in the afternoon after Ontario suspended that surcharge on energy. But by the end of the day, markets had taken a downward turn again, though they ended above their earlier lows. Now, the Bank of Canada, of course, has been watching all of this economic turmoil and will make its latest interest rate decision today. Economists expect the tariff chaos will spark a rate cut. And we're also going to see some fresh data from the U.S. on inflation later today. Now, a lot of investors thought they had Trump, figured out around the election or when they voted for him. But it appears maybe some people were wrong. Many thought he was going to put in policies that would boost the markets right away. Now, Trump has said that this is a period of adjustment, but most economists dismiss the idea that the economy was in need of a shock.
And just briefly, what was up with Trump and all this Tesla thing yesterday that looked like a commercial? What did he do and how did it affect Tesla?
Yeah, that's right. It did look like a commercial. And, experts say Trump's support of Tesla could actually hurt the company. So, Tesla investors, they cheered yesterday as Trump praised Tesla CEO Elon Musk in a press conference as 5 Teslas lined up in the White House driveway. And Trump even announced that he had bought a Tesla. But experts warn the unusual presidential backing of a private company could backfire. So Tesla is becoming a political symbol of Trump and Doge, which is that advisory group that is in charge of cutting the government. And experts say that could be bad for the brand. So while Tesla stock did get a bump yesterday, it was still after one of the worst single-day sell-offs in Tesla's history a day earlier. And Tesla has been, pummeled by competition from rival electric vehicles this year. Showrooms have seen protesters, and even some Tesla owners have put bumper stickers on their cars disavowing Musk. So shares have plummeted 45% so far this year, and shareholders are worried that Musk is too distracted to fully focus on his EV company.
Really quick look at the markets, Crystal Lee.
In Europe, stocks are opening higher. Germany is up, the UK is up, France is up. In Asia, markets are mixed. Japan is up, Shanghai and Hong Kong are both down. Oil is up 44 cents to 66.69 US per barrel. Gold is down 26 cents to $2,915.64 US per ounce. And the dollar is down 0.03 of a cent to 69.3 cents US.
All right, Chris Lee, thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
It's Business News on CBC. Time right now is 6:46 a.m. I'm Marcy Marcusa. And next on the show, let's turn our attention to international news and some local reaction to it. The former president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has been arrested in Manila on the order of the International Criminal Court. That news coming yesterday. The charges stem from his actions during his deadly war on drugs. Some human rights groups estimate that tens of thousands of Filipinos were killed during his time in power. CBC's Jim Agapito yesterday reached out to a few local Filipino activists in Winnipeg. Here's what they say about supporting the arrest.
Hi, my name is Anna Ilagan.
How do you feel about former Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte being arrested?
It feels great, although it's been long overdue since this trial has been going on for 3 years. I welcome this, at least, as a member of Filipino National Democratic organization called Anak Bayan. We welcome this as people's victory, especially for the thousands and thousands of victims who were slain during the drug war in his regime, as well as for their families. It is also a victory for human rights defenders who went up against him during his time.
Diwa Marcelino. I think myself and the organization Migrante, we're happy that justice is finally being served. I think for Filipinos who have been victimized, like my family, we lost two of my dad's nephews, basically my distant cousins. They died at the hands of Duterte's death squads without due process, the same due process that he's enjoying now. So we want the justice not to be further delayed. We want Marcos to fully cooperate with ICC, and he should be prosecuted along with the other actors who made this 30,000 plus deaths possible.
Hi, my name is Jomai Amora Duwek. My initial response was it was like a shocking development, but as a human rights advocate, right, like we, myself, including members of the Philippine Historical Society of Canada, we feel that this arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte is forthcoming. Right? And we believe that this is a moment of justice and accountability. And it is a victory for thousands of victims and their families whose cry for justice have been ignored for a long, long time.
I think it's about time that pro-Duterte supporters realize the gravity of his crimes against the Filipino people. This ICC arrest will serve as a strong proof that this person is definitely not one to support. He's not one for the people. And that we should all come together and rally around calling for justice for the drug war victims of Duterte's regime, and continue to work towards building a just society in the Philippines.
Yeah, I think that the crimes of against humanity are one thing that should be focused on, and we welcome the decision of the ICC. But all the red tagging, calling people terrorists, calling the International United Nations Special Rapporteur on Indigenous People a terrorist, calling students a terrorist, calling unionists a terrorist. These are also crimes that cause the killing of so many activists, and he should be tried and convicted, and he should receive justice in The Hague.
So because of the culture of impunity, you know, there's a culture of fear, it's a culture of violence in the Philippines. I don't blame, I understand why a lot of Filipinos are scared to speak. Because of the systems in place, right? No one is safe, right? It takes courage for people to speak up. And I think we should use this opportunity to speak up, especially now that, like international lens are onto us. Like this is our opportunity to speak up and bring justice to everyone who has been deprived of it.
CBC's Jim Agapito in Winnipeg yesterday talking to local Filipino community activists about Rodrigo Duterte's arrest. We did also, CBC also reached out to more members of the Filipino community, those that supported Duterte in the past during his time in office, and we have not heard any responses back. It is 9 minutes to 7 o'clock on 89.3 FM. It's around -9 in Winnipeg right now. And next on our medical column, flossing your teeth not just for your mouth, but also to lower your risk of heart disease and stroke. Here's Dr. Raj Bhardwaj.
Good morning, Marcy.
So first of all, let's talk about the basics. Tooth flossing and oral health. What's the evidence that supports flossing for dental and mouth health to begin with?
Yeah, really interesting that there is a myth out there that flossing isn't proven to be helpful for oral health. And that myth has a kernel of truth, right? It goes back almost 10 years to 2015 when the U.S. updated their dietary guidelines for Americans. So back then, a law was passed in the States that basically said all advice put forth in official U.S. health guidelines had to be based on scientific evidence, which is great, right? But at the time, there wasn't actually a lot of evidence in terms of studies that proved that flossing was beneficial. It's kind of like, there's no studies that prove that parachutes save lives. We kind of just think, well, that makes sense. It does. So people didn't do the studies. So back then, they updated their guidelines to a more general advice that said a combined approach of reducing the amount of time sugars and starches are in the mouth, drinking fluoridated water, and brushing and flossing teeth is the most effective way to reduce cavities. And the press ran with that and said, oh, there must not be any evidence, or there isn't any evidence that flossing is necessary. So people started to toss their floss. But science doesn't stand still. So since then, there have been all sorts of studies looking at flossing in kids with baby teeth, in adults with their permanent teeth, in older people who might have already lost some teeth, and the results have been pretty consistent. They suggest that not only is flossing good for your teeth and gums, it's also probably good for your heart and brain too. So yeah, the weight of the evidence, especially since 2015, shows that cleaning between your teeth, which is the goal of flossing, improves and maintains your tooth and gum health.
So let's just stay in the mouth for a sec here. How exactly does it help our teeth and gums?
Yeah, so the whole idea behind flossing is to clean your teeth where your toothbrush can't reach very well, right? So below the gum line and on the surfaces between teeth. And those are the places where bacteria and food particles collect, and they form this kind of biofilm. So if you think of, scum on the walls of an aquarium, it's kind of like that. And if you don't clean that scum off, if you don't disrupt that biofilm, then that causes inflammation of the gums. It increases the number of bacteria just sitting there chewing away at your teeth, so increase the risk of cavities. And over time, you can get calcium deposits sticking to your teeth. That's tartar, right? That's the hard stuff that your dental hygienist scratches away at with that sharp metal probe when you go to get your teeth cleaned. But if you do disrupt that bacterial biofilm, then your gums won't be as inflamed. There won't be as many bacteria. You're less likely to get cavities. You are less likely to get the yellowing of your teeth from tartar. It can even help with bad breath. And it can literally prevent your teeth from falling out of your mouth. So you got to disrupt that biofilm, that sort of, scum on the surfaces between your teeth.
Now, I've heard about this connection between flossing and heart health before, but in a limited way. So can you explain what it's all about?
Yeah, so over the past 10 or 15 years, there have been a bunch of studies that look at that association between regular flossing and the risk of heart disease. So the risk that we first started to look at was the risk of atherosclerosis, which is literally hardening of your arteries. And there have been lots of studies. There was another one published in February this year, just last month, not the first of its kind, but it was in a journal called Heart and Lung. It looked at over 7,000 American adults that filled out health surveys. They found that people who said that they flossed 3 or 4 times a week had a lower risk of developing hardening of the arteries. They also had a lower risk of heart attack and stroke. There are other studies that show that people who floss regularly have a lower risk of developing a different kind of heart problem called atrial fibrillation. So that's when the heart doesn't beat regularly, and it's a big risk factor for having a stroke. So there was, looking at that data, there was a study published in January in the journal Stroke, looked at two groups, each over 6,000 people, followed them along for 25 years. So this is a long study. And they found that people who reported flossing had about a 12% lower risk of developing that rhythm problem, that atrial fibrillation, and also a 22% lower risk of stroke overall. And other studies, like I said, these aren't the first of their kind. Other studies have found even bigger effects. Some suggest that people with gum disease have about a 2 to 3 times higher risk of heart attack and about a 2 times greater risk of stroke compared to people who don't have gum disease. So, bottom line, flossing is going to keep your dentist and your dental hygienist happy, but it could keep you out of the emergency department and out of the cardiologist's office as well.
So that's the, what of this, but why? Like, that's the data, I should say, but what's the possible link? How does better oral hygiene lower a person's risk of heart trouble?
Right. So there's at least 3 possible mechanisms behind that, three possible links. So first of all, there's a chance that the bacteria from your mouth can get into the blood vessels in your gums and float around your bloodstream and get to your heart directly and cause problems. And that's why for people who have artificial heart valves, they're actually given antibiotics to take before they go to the dentist, even just for a cleaning, because the dental work can trigger sort of a shower of bacteria getting into your bloodstream. And then, if you have an artificial heart valve, then they can land on the heart valve and cause an infection. So if you have more bacteria, that's a bigger problem. Second thing is that if you have poor dental hygiene, that sets up low-grade chronic immune responses to the bacteria that live in that biofilm, that aquarium scum. And that inflammation, it doesn't just happen in your mouth, it sort of happens everywhere. And scientists figure that inflammation can be a trigger to harden some of the cholesterol deposits in your arteries. So that, again, can cause the hardening of the arteries, increasing your risk for heart attack and stroke. And then the third thing is some mouth bacteria can actually make the blood slightly stickier, which increases your risk of blood clots, which again could give you a heart attack or give you a stroke.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Bardwaj.
My pleasure.
It's our medical column. Heather Wells now with our headlines.
Good morning. Well, it's been 5 years since COVID-19 was first detected in Manitoba. And on this anniversary, experts say this province still has a way to go to fully address the effects of the pandemic. That includes communication of health advice and more attention to mental health issues. And fears the latest tariff threat that now is a reality will produce casualties in Selkirk. Gerdau Steel, one of the biggest employers in the city of 10,000. Terry Shaw at Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters says the impact of heavy tariffs could be incredibly damaging for Selkirk and surrounding areas if there are hundreds of layoffs. I'll be back with more Manitoba news at 7:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
So 5 years since COVID, we're going to talk more about long COVID as well, all in the next hour, and we're going to hear from more Manitobans affected. In addition, can energy security be a key bargaining chip against the U.S., and what's hydro got to do with it? So find out more about that in an interview coming up right after 7 o'clock. And then from Beethoven to Britney Spears, what the color of music looks like. We'll hear about a local event that has to do with that intriguing question. -8 is the temperature right now. It's cloudy in Winnipeg. Our high today is 4 degrees. And Thomas called the commuter line, says there's patchy fog. Highway 16 from the Saskatchewan border through Foxwarren and the Birdtail Valley. So take it easy out there.
Today on The Current.
It wasn't right what they did to us. No, not right at all. They just toyed with us, sort of thing. They did whatever they wanted. Nothing stopped them.
50 years after his conviction for murder, Clarence Woodhouse was declared innocent by a judge. His brother, Russell, died before his conviction could be overturned. The fight for justice for Russell Woodhouse coming up on The Current.
The Current with Matt Galloway. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Helen Mann. A 25% U.S. tariff on steel and aluminum is now in force, putting pressure on Canadian industry and tens of thousands of jobs. We are watching Ottawa to see how the government will respond. It is expected to announce $29.8 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs. The CBC's Janice McGregor is in our parliamentary bureau. Janice, what do we know about how Canada is going to hit back?
Helen, sometimes the last-minute brinkmanship of this trade war has resulted in a reprieve. This time it has not, at least not yet. But the difference between this week and the last round of tariffs that went on is that Canada and Mexico are not alone this time. All steel and aluminum entering the U.S. has now jumped dramatically in price. There are no more exemptions for essential goods in America. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said that in his phone conversation with Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc late yesterday, they discussed how the federal government will be responding today dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. But exactly what that means, whether it's increasing the rates on already tariffed products, adding to the list, or responding with non-tariff retaliation, that is going to have to wait for an official announcement this morning. The government has known for several weeks this could happen, but in any retaliation, it tries to proceed very carefully as what it announces becomes an extra cost for Canadian industries and consumers. And as of late last week, no exemptions to the retaliatory tariffs already in place have been approved for Canadian businesses.
And in the midst of all of this, of course, Mark Carney's still not sworn in as Prime Minister. He's still putting together his team. So how does that affect his response?
The Prime Minister-designate is set to visit with steelworkers in Hamilton today. That is an obvious message of solidarity. Yesterday, he was briefed by Canada's ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, as well as the new fentanyl czar that's working with the Americans on border issues. On social media, he called the latest tariffs an attack on Canada. He tried to reassure Canadians that the government's response is going to have maximum impact in the U.S., minimal impact here, while supporting workers. But he said Canada's tariffs will continue until the Americans show us respect and commit to free and fair trade.
Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he will meet with Mark Carney today and speak with the rest of the country's premiers. Then he's travelling to Washington tomorrow with Federal Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc to meet with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. Let's go to Sarah Levitt in Washington. Sarah, what is the message Ford's bringing to this meeting?
Well, Ford says he wants things to cool down instead of the heated escalation we've seen on both sides these past weeks. And he says the best way is to talk face to face. So he's doing just that alongside Federal Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc in Washington tomorrow. They'll be meeting with Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, and the United States Trade Representative. They'll discuss tariffs, yes, but mostly on the table will be the renegotiation of the free trade agreement. Ford describing it as Lutnick extending an olive branch.
It's not about backing down. It's about sitting around the table and negotiating a fair deal. Let's move this USMCA, move it up forward as quickly as we possibly can, because right now, no one likes uncertainty.
Now that these steel and aluminum tariffs are in effect, what kind of reaction is there in the U.S.?
Well, it was really a chaotic day yesterday in terms of reaction, with insiders just trying to follow the bouncing ball. But some have said they support Trump. 9 steel CEOs have been public about it, urging the president to, quote, stand strong on behalf of American steel. Others, though, disagree, saying the integration of the two industries in Canada and the U.S. is robust and that this 25% tariff only hurts both countries. Dave Wasira is with the United Steelworkers in the U.S.
We've seen this under the last Trump administration, where these tariffs that don't make much sense have hurt people in their pocketbooks, have hurt people with their families and how they feed them. This round, I'm sure, will be no different, just worse.
And let's not forget, we have more tariffs coming. April 2nd is when the 25% on many Canadian goods is set to come into effect. That is, unless Trump changes his mind.
CBC's Sarah Levitt in Washington. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
The European Union is also facing new steel and aluminum tariffs from the United States, and it is mounting a response. Counter tariffs of 26 billion euros worth of U.S. goods. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that is proportionate.
We firmly believe that in a world fraught with geoeconomic and political uncertainties, it is not in our common interest to burden our economies with such tariffs.
Europe's counter tariffs begin April 1st. The Bank of Canada is set to make its latest interest rate announcement today. Several economists are predicting the central bank will once again cut its key lending rate. The question is by how much, given the current trade war with the United States. If the rate is cut by another quarter of a point, it will bring the key lending rate to 2.75%. It would be the bank's seventh consecutive cut to the rate. The U.S. says it is going to present a 30-day ceasefire offer to Russia in the coming days.
We're going to bring it to them directly. We're going to say that Ukraine is prepared to stop all battlefield activity and begin the immediate process of negotiating an enduring end to the war, and we'll see what the response is.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the U.S. plan. Ukraine has already agreed to it. President Volodymyr Zelensky says it is up now to Washington to get Russia's endorsement. But as Briar Stewart reports, there is some doubt that the Kremlin will agree.
As people head to work in Kiev, passing a memorial for Ukrainian soldiers killed in Russia's invasion, there's a lot of skepticism about a potential ceasefire. 58-year-old Nadia Zaharodnya thinks peace is getting closer, but doubts Russia will agree to the U.S. plan. They violated ceasefires and deals multiple times before, she said. I don't know what actions or what kind of influence America can use. A spokesperson for the Kremlin said it needs to hear directly from the U.S. before it comments on the ceasefire proposal. U.S. President Donald Trump is hoping to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the coming days, and the Trump administration's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will be visiting Moscow this week.
The rights and the fate of the people.
In an interview, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the country won't make any compromises that will jeopardize people's lives.
Most of Russian society is tired from those war.
But Sergei Markov, a Moscow-based political scientist and former advisor to Putin, says if Russia agrees to the ceasefire, it will lose the momentum it currently holds on the battlefield. He says Putin faces a dilemma which will test his relationship with Trump.
Biden was just enemy. Trump is a rival. Can it change? Yes.
But even if Russia does agree to a ceasefire, there are questions about how it would be enforced and what would happen if either side violated it. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
The Canadian Navy's top commander is in Antarctica, inspecting the first all-Canadian science and Navy expedition to the continent. Vice Admiral Angus Topshee says Canada needs to understand security issues in the polar south. The CBC's Susan Ormison spoke with him in an exclusive interview in Maxwell Bay.
The Vice Admiral flew into one of Chile's Antarctic research stations, then made a 15-minute transfer by boat to HMCS Margaret Brooke, waiting in Maxwell Bay.
So awesome welcome aboard. Welcome to Antarctica.
Greeted by Commanding Officer Terry Scher.
Farthest south any Canadian ships ever gone, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
Vice Admiral Angus Topshee says the Navy's investment in a month-long climate science expedition in Antarctica has paid dividends.
We need to make sure we evaluate the benefits afterwards. My feeling right now from having talked to the scientists and seen the crew on board and the knowledge that we've gained, I think it is worthwhile.
But Topshee's strategic goal for Operation Projection in South America is to build relationships with southern navies to assess security tensions at the other pole.
We can see what China and Russia have been doing in and around the Canadian North. I wonder what's going on in the South Pole.
Do you think there's a security concern here in Antarctica, as there is in the Arctic?
I definitely do.
He'll visit Chile's station today. In a crowded outpost by Antarctic standards, it's situated right between the Great Wall, a Chinese station, and a Russian one. He won't be visiting either of those. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Maxwell Bay, Antarctica.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. You can listen to us live every morning on the CBC News app. Just tap on the local icon. I'm Helen Mann. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at Information Radio on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on that app and on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's -8 right now in the city. We have had some foggy conditions reported as well, so we're going to hear more about that from Corey in just a moment. This hour on the program, March 12th, the day of tariffs, of course, on steel and aluminum, but also a day in our Manitoba history. It's been 5 years today since the first cases of confirmed COVID-19 were diagnosed in Manitoba. Months later, long COVID symptoms started to appear. This hour on the program, nearly 1/4 of Manitobans infected with the virus suffered from long COVID, and many Manitobans are still struggling to get the care and supports they need. So we're going to have a comprehensive look at that. We're also asking, in 5 years, how your life has changed since COVID. Did your habits change? Did something change with your place of work or business or in your home life? Or maybe you lost someone. If you want to weigh in this morning, we're taking calls at 788-3205. Also, during World Report, I was looking back at photos from the 5 years, COVID and documenting things. I took a lot of photos trying to, understanding the pandemic was going to be history in the future, of course. And so I'm wondering whether or not you want to share some photos with us, too, and we'll put something together for after 8. But if you do, you can do that on my Facebook page, which is Marcy Marcusa. All right, let's get into other headlines and developing stories. Heather Wells joins us now live from our news center.
Good morning. Well, 25% tariffs on shipments of Canadian steel and aluminum to the U.S. are now in effect. It has some people in Selkirk fearing for their futures. One of the biggest employers in the city of 10,000 is Gerdau Steel. We're going to hear from Terry Shaw, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Group, who says the imposition of tariffs will be felt right across that city. Former Manitoba PC leadership candidate Shelley Glover says she is trying to form a new political party in this province. It would be a conservative alternative to the Manitoba Progressive Conservatives. We'll hear why in our next local news coming up at 7:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Abby, how's the weather going to be today?
Yeah, we're looking at clear conditions throughout the day. Temperatures will be climbing down south. We see a mix of sun and clouds. Some snow and freezing rain in the forecast sometime tonight. Up north, we're seeing colder temperatures, snow, icy conditions in the Thompson-Churchill region. We're seeing that, but Thompson is going to see some sun today. -8 in Winnipeg, cloudy start. Don't worry, the sun is going to make its appearance. We'll warm up to +4 today, and then tonight, for those moon gazers, you might get to see it for a short period before the clouds will take over around the midnight, bringing some snow your way that would sneak in into tomorrow morning. But for the rest of the province, we're looking at cloudy start. A chance of snow in some areas. Some areas will see freezing rain, and then temperatures will gradually warm up in most of the regions down south. We're seeing -10s in the southern regions at this time. Winnipeg, -8, warming up to +4.
All right, thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Let's get into what's going on now with the morning commute. Corey, you've had some calls about fog?
That's right, yeah. No major issues other than these fog patches I'm hearing about. Particularly got a call from Thomas who's saying Highway 16, pretty much right from the Saskatchewan border, through Foxhorn, kind of into the Birdtail Valley there. Some patchy fog, so nothing crazy, but definitely worth keeping an eye out for. Might be some fog around Gimli as well, but if you see something going on out there, if you're walking, biking, driving, you got a new pothole to report, give me a call. That number, 204-788-3093.
Well, to our first interview this hour, and it is about those tariffs, 25% U.S. tariffs in effect against Canadian steel and aluminum. That's what we woke up to this morning. It is the latest move in the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and Canada. It's been like a tennis match. The U.S. and Canada, as you've been hearing in the news and in Heather's headlines, lobbying tariff threats back and forth in recent days. And energy has been at the crux of the conversation. So on Monday, Ontario Premier Doug Ford said his province would add a 25% surcharge on exports of electricity to some U.S. states. And then 24 hours later, and a few retaliatory threats later, Ford took energy off the board, and then Trump took that extra 25% tariff off the board, and back and forth we go. Now, Manitoba has not taken the same approach around energy, but Premier Wab Kinew said the province is considering barring U.S. companies from taking part in Manitoba hydro infrastructure projects moving forward. So to talk more about all of this, Markham Hislop is with us. He's an energy and climate journalist, and just as it happens, he grew up in the Thompson-Gillam area, and he used to work for Hydro back in the day at one point too. So he joins us this morning, though, from BC. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Marcy.
Thank you so much for being with us to walk us through some of this. So in your view, how significant a role does the energy trade have to play in our tariff showdown?
Well, quite a bit, actually. And I would start by saying that what happened yesterday with electricity really was a significant turn, because the question has been from the beginning of this trade war, who had the most leverage? Is it the supplier of the energy or the customer of the energy, the United States? And when Doug Ford put on the 25% tariff, he got an immediate response from Donald Trump saying, it wasn't fair. We were playing dirty, which is entirely ironic for a guy who wants to annex Canada, right? But the fact that then his Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, offered an olive branch to Doug Ford in Ontario, I think was a bit of a sign of weakness. It shows that they're vulnerable to the threat of higher electricity prices or even turning off electricity, which would be a disaster for the northeastern seaboard. And you mentioned Manitoba. None of the other hydro provinces, which are big exporters to the U.S., they've been very quiet about this. And I think that's quite deliberate. I think Doug Ford is kind of the stalking horse, but BC, Manitoba, and Quebec are waiting in the wings if required in this trade war, I think.
And Premier Canoe is going to be meeting. All the premiers actually are meeting today, in fact, and I believe meeting also with the Prime Minister designate as well. So with Wap Canoe saying the province is considering, barring U.S. companies from taking part in Manitoba hydro infrastructure projects. Following what you said about, what Doug Ford had, when he said he was going to pull energy off the table for the U.S. and then that having an immediate effect, will the effect of barring companies from being part of projects have the same kind of impact?
I don't think we know yet, and I haven't interviewed an economist about it, so I don't have an informed opinion. But I would say that if you look at reactions to American businesses whose products have been pulled off Canadian shelves, like Jack Daniels, for example, down in Tennessee, they were pretty upset about it. So I think that many of these kinds of actions over time will have an immediate effect. And on the energy side, we've seen oil refiners down in the United States, and we import 4 million barrels of Canadian oil a day. They're burning up the phone lines to the White House, trying to figure out how this is going to affect them and how the tariffs are going to be applied. It's chaos. This trade war is probably the most mismanaged trade war in the history of trade wars.
If I can interject for a minute, does it matter what any of us do around energy in Canada if Alberta doesn't get on board? Because Danielle Smith said it's not an option for her province.
Yeah, well, okay. There's 2 points here. One is when infrastructure or products go across an international border, that's the Canadian government's purview. So if it wants to slap on a 25% export tax, it certainly can do that. If you're talking about curtailing the amount of oil and gas that goes down to the American market, that's another matter. I'm not quite entirely sure what the constitutional issues are there, but Alberta does have that legislation in place and used it in 2018, 2019, if it needs to. So I think this, from Smith's point of view, this is more a political issue than an issue of who has the authority to do it.
Is this going to get, you lived here in Manitoba, as I said, and you worked for Hydro back in the day a bit as well. So I wonder whether or not this is going to be the catalyst that gets an east-west power grid built in this country, which has been talked about for decades and decades. And even at one point there was funding that came forward and then pulled back, and which would greatly benefit Manitoba. I wonder if you think we're going to see, those talks get serious.
I don't know whether I would suspect we will, and I've covered that particular issue for a number of years here at Energy Media, and the message I get from economists and others who are in the business is that the only impediment to doing more east-west trade, building interconnections, for example, between the various provinces, and particularly in Western Canada, because we have 2 hydro provinces, BC and Manitoba, that bookend Alberta and Saskatchewan, which have tremendous wind and solar resources. So east-west trade is a very good thing, but the biggest impediment, I'm told, is political. And so a trade war, threats from Trump may be the very thing that catalyzes Canadian politicians to finally put aside those differences and come to the table.
Thank you very much, Markham. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Via Zoom live on CBC, that's Markham Hislop, an energy and climate journalist. We reached him in BC this morning, but as we mentioned, he previously had lived here in Manitoba up in the Thompson-Gillum area.
This is Michael Bublé, host of the Junos, Canada's biggest night in music. And trust me, this lineup is going to be everything.
With performances by Aquila, Josh Ross, Nemesis, Snotty Nose Rez Kids, Tia Wood, a special final performance by Sum 41, and Michael Bublé.
Now that's what I call a party.
Don't miss the Junos, live March 30th at 8 Eastern on CBC and CBC Gem.
And you're all invited.
Well, if you can't wait for that live performance at the Junos by Aquila, here is the Toronto R&B artist this morning on CBC. This is Bloom.
Think I left my sweater back at your house. Bluffing, I just wanna keep you around. Could we pour up something we can barely pronounce? It was difficult to say I love you out loud. Been a minute since I went and took the love route. But you visit and you kiss away my self-doubt. Any closer to the sidewalk when we go out. You see me in everything you do, how you call my name. Sunday afternoon, come and make it rain. Let the flowers bloom, ease my pain. Always tell the truth, can you answer me? Yeah. What is it you see? What is it you see? Tell me, why do you believe in me? Would you keep your schedule free for me? I love it, hear you pleasing me. Go home, get deep for me. This kind of love is free in me. Go home, I'm listening, you can speak to me. Tell me what it is you need from me. In any other universe, I'd find you. I'm falling, you're my favorite thing to cling to. You love me with my past, but I can't undo. My future's in everything you do, how you call my name. Sunday afternoon, come and make it rain. Let the flowers bloom, ease my pain. Always tell the truth, can you answer me? Yeah. What is it you see? What is it you see? Tell me, why do you believe in me? Why do you believe? Would you keep your schedule free for me? I love it, hear you pleasing me. Go get deep for me. This kind of love is free. This kind of love is free. I'm listening, you can speak to me. Tell me what it is you need from me. What is it you see in me? Tell me, why do you believe in me? Why do you believe? Would you keep your schedule free for me? I love it, hear you pleasing me. Go on, get deep for me. This kind of love is free in me. Go on, I'ma listen, you can speak to me. You can speak, tell me what it is you need from me.
Toronto R&B singer Aquila, who's going to be performing at the Junos, and she's nominated. That's her tune called Bloom. The Junos are on March 30th. I'm RC Marcusa, -8 in Winnipeg and Brandon. Thompson, -28. And if you need us on the drive on this foggy start to the day, 788-3093 is where you can reach us on the commuter line. This is your morning show, Information Radio on CBC, 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and on YouTube. Well, in the 7:30 news, we're going to hear more about today being a significant day when you look at our Manitoba history. 5 years ago today, March 12th, the first confirmed case of COVID-19 here in Manitoba. So there's a couple things going on Facebook. First of all, I just posted a gallery of photos from memories that I wanted to save from the pandemic, and so you can check that out. You can post your own photo as well. We'd love to see that. Which ones did you keep? Did you take pictures of signs, of masks, of let's see those photos from COVID. I even posted one of when I was cutting my husband's hair because that's the only choice he had. was me trying to cut his hair in the bathroom. Maybe that happened in your house too. So love to see your photos. Also, though, we're asking you how your life has changed in 5 years because of COVID. So let us know. 788-3205. Some comments already coming in. We have a number of comments here. I'm going to read just a couple before sports here. My England Link letter wrote in, I quit smoking. Said, I used to smoke as a way of coping with stress. I remember thinking, this is a virus that attacks lungs. If I smoke, I'm compromising my safety. And that was it. The stress of the pandemic overrode the nicotine withdrawals over 2 weeks. And I do smoke on vacation, but for the most part, no cigarettes in Canada for 51 weeks of the year. We also have folks writing in about their work. Barbara Froman saying, I'm a pediatric speech language pathologist. COVID drastically changed the way I work. First, I was shut down. We went in, but no clients. Then we got virtual. Trying to keep preschoolers engaged with me over a screen without my games and puzzles was exhausting. And then when we started back with limited in person and wearing masks, I could only disinfect toys so much. So it was great to see, though, kids again. But then the masks and the windows, everything was really hot. And I was never so excited to get a shot in my life, Barbara writes. So she's just remembering how her life has changed and her thoughts. So all of us have our own stories and lenses about COVID. Love to hear what you're thinking on this 5-year anniversary of the first case in Manitoba. Let's get to sports, though, here next. Paul McGowan is in to talk about the NHL. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So one Jet in particular making his mark with the new team last night with our Jets.
Yeah, making his mark and probably leaving last night's game with marks all over his body. The newly acquired Luke Schenn led all skaters with 5 hits, also had 5 blocked shots in last night's 2-1 victory over the Rangers. Now, not only was this Schenn's first game with the Jets, it was also his first game action in a week after being traded twice ahead of the NHL's trade deadline, first to the Penguins, of course, and then to Winnipeg. Speaking afterwards, Schenn described it as almost a second Four Nations break, just how long he was off. And both Schenn and fellow deadline acquisition Brandon Tanev drew fan appreciation as they played in their first home game with Winnipeg. But it wasn't just fans letting their appreciation be known. Cole Perfetti, who set up both Jet goals, spoke glowingly of Schenn.
A lot more fun to play with him than against him, I'll tell you that. I've been hit a couple times for sure, yeah. Didn't feel good, and he's also, it's hard to get shots through. Like, I mean, that's a perfect example tonight. In the third period there, he rocked a couple guys, and then in the last 10 minutes, he had, 3 or 4 blocks, whatever it was, that were, he's almost playing goalie. Like, he took up so much space, and you can't get it past him, so that's amazing.
The win keeps the Jets tied with Washington for top spot in the league, although the Capitals do have a game in hand. Winnipeg next in action tomorrow against Dallas.
Let's go to Olympic news, Paul. Canada's putting the pieces together for next year's Winter Games.
And putting a big piece in place in the form of next winter's chef de mission. It will be Jennifer Heil, the former mogul skier, won gold in Turin in 2006 and then a silver in Vancouver. And she takes on this role that is part spokesperson, part mentor, part cheerleader. Now, for casual fans, the chef de mission is really just that first thing, a spokesperson. But Heil talked about it being a vital support position for her at each of her Olympic appearances.
I remember every chef de mission of my Olympic Games, and feeling like their steadfast energy and confidence in you made all the difference. I'm excited to rely on what I experienced as an athlete, from being a rookie to having crushing pressure. Like, I have seen the gamut, and I have a lot to draw on for the athletes, but I think more than that, I have perspective, and sometimes perspective is lacking.
We are still about a year out from those Winter Games, but it will be a busy one for Jennifer Heil. She has preparation seminars for athletes, games-related committees that she sits on to finalize team selection, all sorts of work to be done ahead of next February's opening ceremony.
And let's talk baseball to end here. What's the latest from spring training?
The talk yesterday was about Jays slugger Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the team, and him trying earlier this month to hammer out a contract extension. Jays fans quite unhappy when that deal did not get done, but that sentiment might be turning a little bit. Reports yesterday say that the Jays offered Guerrero in the neighborhood of $500 million, which is seen as a mostly fair offer in a lot of baseball corners. So it has fans wondering whether or not Vladdy actually wants to be a Blue Jay. We will see what happens. Maybe all of this pressure from these leaks leads the two sides a little bit closer together in discussions.
All right, Paul, thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
That's Paul McGowan live with Morning Sports on CBC. Still ahead, we are going to have our community reporter who's been out and about with a story for us. From Beethoven to Britney Spears, we're going to find out what the color of music looks like. And so stay tuned. You'll hear and see what we're talking about there. I'm Marcy Marcusa. You are with CBC, and the news is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, it is -8. The sunshine is going to punch its way through these clouds, clearing in Winnipeg today, and warmer than seasonal, a high this afternoon of 4. It has been 5 years since the first cases of COVID-19 were identified in Manitoba. The anniversary of the pandemic has some experts looking at areas the province needs to address to respond better to future emergencies. Michelle Dreger is a professor of community health sciences at the University of Manitoba. She says the pandemic exposed areas where the province's public health communications could have been better. In particular, explaining some of the public health advice as recommendations changed.
People were not always tracking at the same time with some of the shifts because it just seemed so confusing. So I think we need to really do a better job of trying to make sure that we're trying to address why something has changed and repeating that a bit more often.
Dreger says making sure people have easy access to credible information they can understand is important. Now, some experts say the pandemic exposed weaknesses around communications about vaccines. Epidemiologist Cynthia Carr says messaging about the different kinds of effectiveness could have been better. She says when vaccinated people got COVID-19, it led some to believe the shots didn't work.
Tens of thousands of Canadians did die, unfortunately, from COVID, but many are here today because they were vaccinated. And although they may have gotten infected and they may have gotten sick, that vaccine gave your immune system enough information to get ready to fight.
Data from the province up to March 6th shows Manitoba has reported more than 3,800 COVID-19 related deaths. The United States has officially increased tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports to 25%. The policy applies to all countries. And these tariffs are separate from the first round of tariffs that President Trump levied on Canada last week and then later dialed back a bit. Jonathan Wilkinson is Canada's energy minister.
I think it's a very sad statement that we have arrived at this place. We need to find a pathway back to a better conversation. And honestly, everybody is suffering, and certainly Americans are suffering. I mean, $4 trillion has been wiped out of the stock market in a couple of weeks. That's not a good thing for the United States, and it's not a good thing for Canada.
Now, one of the biggest employers in the city of Selkirk, city of 10,000, just north of Winnipeg, is Gerdau Steel. 70% of the steel produced there is shipped to the United States. Terry Shaw at Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters says the impact of heavy tariffs could be incredibly damaging.
What does it mean to the town of Selkirk and surrounding areas if hundreds of people, are on work share or laid off, et cetera? What does that mean to the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry, the arts, the charitable sectors?
We expect to hear from the federal government, the Government of Canada, an official response to these tariffs in just over an hour from now at 8:45 Central Time. You can hear the latest national and international news coming up on World Report at 8. Former Manitoba PC leadership candidate Shelley Glover says she is working to form a new Conservative party in Manitoba. She says the Progressive Conservatives can't shed the baggage from their refusal to search Prairie Green landfill. CBC's Bartley Kivas reports.
Shelley Glover came within 373 votes of becoming PC leader and premier in 2021. She lost to Heather Stephenson and went to court to try to overturn the result, but Glover remained a party member until 2023 when the PC government refused to search Prairie Green landfill and then ran election ads promoting that decision. Interim party leader Wayne Owasco apologized for this last week.
Our government erred. It's as simple as that.
Glover said she was proud of Owasco, but then came comments from PC leadership candidate Abhi Khan, who wouldn't call the refusal to search the landfill a mistake, and Wally Dowdrich, who said he would have sought corporate funding for the landfill search. Glover says she can't support either candidate and is now working on an alternative to the PCs.
There are many of us looking at forming a new party.
PC President Brent Poole says a new Manitoba Conservative Party would only end up splitting the right-of-centre vote if it gets any traction at all. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
We'll make that the 45th win of the season.
Here's a chance, and Velarde scores! It's a power play goal, and it's 2-1 Winnipeg.
Gabe Velarde in the second period on TSN as the Jets edged the New York Rangers 2-1, assisting Cole Perfetti, who says his pass didn't go exactly as planned.
I was going to take it to the net and then and realized that Gabe, I think, was pretty open and tried to catch myself and mishandled it in a good way to, I guess, fake everyone out. It was, it was a little bit of a panic. I wanted to take it to the net and then mishandled it, and it worked out well.
Last night's win keeps Winnipeg on top of the NHL standings, tied for first with the Washington Capitals. Next up, the Jets host Dallas on Friday. You can find more news updated throughout the day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Heather Wells in our news center. Now it's time for our regional forecast on CBC with Abby Adiyemi.
We're looking at cloudy start to the day. However, the conditions will improve in most areas as the day goes on. We'll see some clear conditions. Snow and freezing rain in the forecast. That will develop in some regions tonight with colder temperatures. For Winnipeg at this point, -8, cloudy outside. This will clear, leading to a milder +4 rather. And then tonight we'll see snow return with a risk of freezing rain as the temperature will be dropping to -4 later. Similar conditions we're seeing in the Pimna Valley region from Morris, Morden, Winkler, Altona to Winnipeg. Temperatures around -6 at this time. The clouds will clear and you'll see highs around +4. Heading west to Brandon, -8. We're looking at mostly cloudy skies for the Westman region. The day will become a mix of sun and clouds with a high of 2 degrees. Snow or freezing rain in the forecast. That's expected tonight into tomorrow morning. In the Parkland region, -10 in Dauphin at this time. Cloudy conditions you're seeing. The day will clear up. You see some light breeze and a high of 1. Tonight also snow may fall for folks in Dauphin. In the Interlake region, it is -10 in Gimli with that fog still hanging around. It should clear up as you get into the day. For folks in Gimli, you warm up to 2 degrees, though snow is expected tonight as some clouds would also be coming with that. In the powerful influence surrounding areas, temperatures hovering around -13 at this time. We're seeing that light snow. It was heavy earlier. Temperatures will get to -8. This light snow is expected to end by the afternoon, and we'll see the wind chill of -30 overnight. For Thompson, -25 at this time, partly cloudy. Expect a high of -13, and for Churchill, temperatures around -27 with ice crystals being felt there. Breezy northwest winds, highs around -9. Though the wind chill for folks in Churchill this morning, it feels like -39. So across the province, we're seeing that cloudy start, and then it's going to clear, but then we'll have that chance of snow and freezing rain down south later tonight.
All right. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Corey Funk's been picking up the phone on the commuter line.
Yeah, and I haven't heard of any major issues. Just a little bit of patchy fog on Highway 16 from the Saskatchewan border kind of through Foxwarren and the Birdtail Valley there. Got a call from Thomas about that. Other than that, haven't heard of any major issues, but if you see some going on, you want to complain about some slippery sidewalks, anything like that, give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number, 204-788-3093.
Open for complaints. That's dangerous, man.
I know. Well, see, I'm willing. Let's do it.
Next on the show, we know that many popular songs sound like and even get, we know what they sound like, and we even often get melodies right stuck in our head on occasion, the old earworm. But a Winnipeg artist has created a unique exhibit. It's aimed to make you listen to music, but also see music a little bit differently. Here's CBC community reporter Shanley Vidal.
For people with synesthesia, they can experience multiple senses like sight and sound all at once. I'm Shanley Vidal, and I'm here at the Creatory Gallery in Winnipeg. That's where artist Jan Rogers is showing people what the color of songs looks like to her.
This one is Toxic by Britney Spears, which is a very bright neon
borderline too much for me to listen to. It's actually almost hard to listen to just because there's these pieces of it that are a little bit spiky, but it's definitely a lot of pinks and this constant whirlwind. Synesthesia is a mixing of the senses. So every time I hear a song or a word or a sound, in the back of my mind, or kind of the forefront of my mind, there's visual imagery as well as colors. And so this show is trying to capture some of that and share it with my audience so that they see sort of the tapestry of my brain and what I'm seeing pretty much 24/7. I base them on song titles because that's an easy way for people to sort of relate to what I'm doing and kind of can visualize it a little bit easier. So if you look through the songs, for example, the green images are a lot of classical pieces. The colorful ones that are behind me are a lot of alternative rock and roll songs. So there's a bit of a correlation to it, not 100%. Certain songs, when I'm painting them, I'm like, oh, that really looks different than what you would imagine. Okay, so they're totally different things. Furelise, so classical piece. Enter Sandman by Metallica. There's some really subtle transitions between the light greens and the blues and the purples, and it's almost like a galaxy. Likewise with this little one, it's blue, but then there's metallic sheen and there's some textures to it. So as you get close up, you get a really intimate view of what is going on the canvas. It's funny, the first time I hear a song is really interesting because I just don't know what it's going to unfold like in my brain. And it's very consistent. After I hear a song a couple times, it's pretty much the same pattern and the same colors. And then the images and shapes, like a chorus is going to come up several times usually in a song. And that's a place where I can grab certain patterns and shapes, sometimes textures as well. For this piece here, the song is The Less I Know the Better by Tame Impala. When I first listened to it, I was seeing these beautiful, vibrant rainbows in the background, which is what I've demonstrated, as well as some muted colors, but then also there was this overarching layer of, I've described it as dripping, but like almost like pouring down of neon colors sort of merging with it. Each image that I paint is multi-layered. So I paint, sometimes I paint with the black light on and sometimes I paint with the black light off. So when I'm producing an image, you'll get the image that you see, but then as soon as you put the black light on, you'll get a second layer to it, which kind of translates into what it's like in my brain. There's these hidden elements.
Rogers hopes to put together a Spotify playlist with all of the 50-plus songs featured in the exhibit. But there are some genres, like country, that won't be part of it.
The songs that I dislike and the genres of music that I dislike are, for lack of a better term, they kind of are sharp and spiky and unpleasant to listen to because they are unpleasant to look at in my brain. They might be muddied colors, they might be unpleasant to say the shapes. So every image I look at, it's a part of the song that, for me, they make me happy.
Studies estimate that 4% of the population has synesthesia. You can catch Crossed Wires at the Curatorry Gallery in Winnipeg through March 25th. Shanley Vidal, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And that is our community reporter in unit here, Shanley Vidal. As she just mentioned, you can also catch the exhibit, but also meet Jan Rogers at Curatorry Gallery on Friday night. That's part of this month's First Fridays in the Exchange. Time right now is 7:43 a.m. and still ahead this half hour, we're going to talk about the 5-year anniversary since the first case of COVID confirmed in Manitoba, March 12th, 2020. And here we are. 2025, 5 years later. We're going to talk specifically, though, about long COVID and what we understand about that 5 years on. -8 in the city of Winnipeg, minus a little bit foggy out there on the drive. And a bit of music next from Boy Golden, who's heading to the Junos for the first time at the end of the month.
I'm gonna face my demons, even if it breaks my legs, even if it breaks my spirit, walking around downtown all day. We all got our own reasons, all got bills to pay. One day, son, you'll get it straight and you won't have to walk this way. Wake up and place your bets. Wake up and wait in line. One day you'll pay off all your debt. I know it ain't the time. Changing with the seasons, going it all alone. I got friends, and when I see them, it feels like coming home. Yes, it does. Grab a drink, come on by. Anytime you're getting high, place your bets and get in line. Even losers get to try from time to time to get it right. Ain't that a sweet thought, sweetheart? I ain't one to lie. Take my leave of Winnipeg, get myself a place off a Highway 5 mountain road someday, but not today. Find myself some peace of mind. Just behind my eyes there's a bluebird waiting to sing her song, and I'm gonna let her fly. Let her fly.
Listen to Here to Stay from his Juno-nominated album For Eden. This is Boy Golden. So the Winnipeg country artist is one of 5 in the running for Contemporary Roots Album of the Year at the Junos this year. They will be handed out on March 30th. 7:46 a.m. the time right now on your Wednesday morning. And next on the program, it has been 5 years today since the first cases of COVID-19 were diagnosed in our province. And according to data, as you might have heard of this in the news, data up to last week, March 6th, the virus has contributed to the deaths of almost 4,000 Manitobans. 63-year-old Valerie Alderson says her 82-year-old father, Lloyd Hodgins, died from COVID complications within days of going to a hospital for a broken hip. Here's part of her story today.
My father was in the care home and had fallen and broken his hip, was transferred to a local hospital and diagnosed and confirmed that he had a fractured hip, sent to a second hospital for the surgery. And at that time, the guidelines from the hospital were you had to wear a mask and you were only allowed a 30-minute visit each day. And so there was my sister and I, but we couldn't visit together. We had to visit separately. I'd seen him on Saturday. He was declining. He was just not himself. My sister had seen him, and then they did the COVID test and determined that he had COVID. And because of being in the nursing home prior to that, the nursing home has a do not resuscitate. So they transferred him to the unit that was managing people with COVID. And then he died early Monday morning, all alone, without anybody. I was upset, but the process, both my sister and I were vaccinated. We could have had our masks on, visors on, gown on, gloves on, be with him. But like any other facility that had a loved one that was passing away due to complications of COVID, the only people that were to be present on those units were the staff members. We are one of many families that has gone through that. It'll always be a part of who you are, what you had gone through, and at that period of time, it was so much was unknown, and everybody was trying to scramble to get things into place and try to protect the public and try to protect the healthcare workers. And I think we should have put things into place. If someone brings up the topic about the COVID, well, then it's a flashback. Got to take care of myself now. So I have more years behind me than I have ahead of me. I always think it's important that when you have a loved one go, like whether it's your parent, your sibling, it's important for someone to be there, whether it's to hold their hand, to wipe their face, to sing a song, to read poetry, whatever, because the hearing is the last thing that goes on any person that's passing away, and then they're gone.
That's Valerie Alderson. She lost her father due to complications with COVID. We're talking all about COVID today because we're at the 5-year mark of the first 2 cases diagnosed here in Manitoba. So continue to share your thoughts, memories, how your life has changed, what we've learned or not learned as a province on our listener line, 788-3205. Well, it wasn't long after the first infections that long COVID symptoms then started to surface. Health professionals knew very little about the impact. So a group of data scientists and doctors at the University of Manitoba started collecting and studying health data to learn more. So let's find out 5 years on where they're at. Dr. Alan Katz is with us via Zoom live on CBC, health sciences researcher and family physician at the University of Manitoba. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
Just because I saw you listening to Valerie's story, I sort of saw you absorbing this. I'm wondering what you're thinking about today, on this 5-year significant anniversary in our province.
Yeah, we all lived through a terrible time, and that story is just so heartbreaking. And it's not a unique story. It's not an unusual story. It's a very common one. Many people suffered numerous consequences and loss during that time, particularly family members. What happened during personal care homes, not just in Manitoba, but across Canada, was just heartbreaking. And we really need to learn the lessons of the humane aspect of caring for people, not just treating and looking after a disease. We're looking after human beings with emotions and needs. And I think we need to learn those lessons for future pandemics.
When it comes to your data for long COVID, I want to turn to your study. Tell me first, what are the symptoms of long COVID? And 5 years later, what have you learned?
So long COVID is a syndrome, a condition that starts by definition about 3 months after the positive test for COVID, for the virus. So symptoms that occur in that first 3 months after infection are not really regarded as part of long COVID. They're still part of that initial infection. If symptoms persist beyond the 3 months, we're talking about fatigue, just devastating fatigue. People who actually struggle to get out of bed at all in the morning. It really makes life incredibly hard. But that's just one. Inability to think clearly, what people often call brain fog, shortness of breath, cough, headaches, irregular heartbeats, diarrhea. There are no system in the body is spared from long COVID. The study that we did, we looked at over 200 symptoms because those were all in the literature described as being associated with this initial viral infection and the consequences of that.
How many people did you study, and what demographic did you find was most at risk for long COVID?
So we looked at over 66,000 people in Manitoba who had positive COVID tests. We found that about 23% of them, more than 1 in 5, almost 1 in 4, had presented to a healthcare provider with these symptoms, new symptoms, 3 months after their infection. So that's not an uncommon event. That's a concern. And older people were much more susceptible. People who had other illnesses, other diseases made them more susceptible. Women were more susceptible. And people who had vaccines were protected. So that's the good news in this, that vaccines don't necessarily totally prevent any infection, but they prevent severe infections. And people with more severe infections who landed up in hospital were also much more likely to get long COVID.
What kind of clinics right now do we have in Manitoba then to treat long COVID? Where are we at with the treatment?
So, Marcy, the treatment of long COVID is very complex, and there are no single treatments. It's not like there's a drug to treat any one of these conditions by itself or as a group. So there is no single long COVID clinic in Manitoba, and although there are some clinics in other provinces, long COVID is less common now. People are vaccinated. Most folks have either been vaccinated or had an infection at some time in their lives. So if they do get an infection, they're much less likely to get long COVID now. And that's our research and other research has confirmed this. So there is no single long COVID clinic in Manitoba other than a clinic at the Misericordia, which was around physiotherapy, helping people with their rehabilitation. But most of the resources are online, where people can go online. There are some very good online resources that Shared Health will direct people to. And then it's a matter of going to your family doctor, to a rehab specialist with the advice and following through. But there is no single long COVID treat-all place.
Do we know if the long COVID symptoms, those who did have long COVID symptoms, if they got better? Like, do we have a sense of that yet, or if some of the symptoms got better or lessened? What do we understand about the longevity of long COVID?
Yes to all of those. So the reality is that some people get better and some people get better quite quickly. Some people really struggle, and 5 years on from the initial beginning of the pandemic, we still have a number of people whose lives have been devastated by long COVID, who suffer every single day. And those are the minority. There are not a lot of them, but for them, they're one of one. They are living this every single day, and it makes life very difficult for them. You know, one of the things that the Chief Science Officer of Canada put together a task force of us to look at long COVID, and I was privileged to be asked to be part of that. And one of the challenges we faced is that there was no definition of long COVID. So people who lost their jobs, they can't go to work. There was no way they could get insurance benefits for that. Things like that, we've come a long way. Those kinds of things have been explored, and I think there are some things in place. But this is not just a medical condition with symptoms. It affects every aspect of people's lives when they still have these severe long COVID symptoms.
What needs to change to help people still living with long COVID symptoms, in your view, in terms of our healthcare system?
I think it would be good if we did have a one-stop shop where people could at least contact the healthcare system and say, I've still got severe symptoms. Where should I go? What should I do? It doesn't necessarily mean setting up an expensive clinic for the system. It just means recognizing that people are still suffering, and where can they go to get their particular symptoms best treated. You know, some of those symptoms are about anxiety, for instance. So going to a medical clinic, drugs is not the best thing for treatment of anxiety. There are other ways of treating for anxiety that are more effective. And so we need to think about that. In our system currently, psychologists, for instance, are generally not covered by Medicare. So maybe for people with long COVID with severe anxiety because of that, there should be a way of getting them care that is covered by Medicare. This is not a simple thing, but I think there are things that we could do to make the lives of people who are severely impacted easier.
Thank you very much for being with us today. Really appreciate your perspective and you telling us about your research.
Thanks for having me.
That is Dr. Alan Katz, a health sciences researcher and family physician at the University of Manitoba. Here now with headlines once again is Heather Wells.
Well, 25% tariffs on shipments of Canadian steel and aluminum to the United States are now in effect, and some people in Selkirk are fearing for their futures. One of the biggest employers is Gerdau Steel. Terry Shaw at the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters says the imposition of those tariffs will be felt right across Selkirk. Former Manitoba PC leadership candidate Shelley Glover says she is working to form a new Conservative party in Manitoba. She says the Progressive Conservatives can't shed the baggage from their refusal to search Prairie Green landfill. I'll be back with more Manitoba news coming up at 8:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, we were talking about tariffs, of course, all morning long, and after 8 o'clock, we are going to talk to the owner of a local company that manufactures steel wire products about the impact that steel tariffs will have specifically on his company. So stay tuned. He'll be in studio with us. It's -8 and cloudy in Winnipeg. Watch for the fog around Gimli and stay with us here on CBC. I'm Marcy Marcusa. You're on 89.3 FM.
Today on Q with Tom Power.
The Canadian producer Boy Wonder has made hits for Drake, Beyonce, Rihanna, Eminem, and now he's receiving the International Achievement Award at this year's Junos. So he came in to reflect on his career and talk you through some of his biggest hits.
Kind of like just throwing paint at the wall when I make music. It just kind of happens, you know?
That's coming up on Q, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current with Matt Galloway.
50 years after his conviction for murder, Clarence Woodhouse was declared innocent by a judge. His brother, Russell, died before his conviction could be overturned. The fight for justice for Russell Woodhouse coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Helen Mann. U.S. President Donald Trump is about to learn the consequences of his new steel and aluminum tariffs. Here is Canada's Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon.
We will retaliate. We will retaliate in a corresponding way, and we will inflict harm, economic harm on the U.S.
Canada's countermeasures will affect $29.8 billion worth of U.S. goods, a proportional response aimed at getting Trump to lift these 25% tariffs. As Nisha Patel reports, they will have a significant effect on Canadian businesses and workers.
It's causing a lot of havoc, chaos.
Nova Steel CEO Scott Jones says just the threat of tariffs has already slowed business. The uncertainty over higher costs turning off American customers.
It stops investment and everyone's waiting. People don't even want to buy inventory.
Jones says for his company, a low Canadian dollar will provide some buffer to 25% tariffs, though any higher rate would be tough to manage.
Then we're really in trouble in Canada and really would basically shut down all of our export opportunities.
Canada exports more than 90% of its steel and aluminum south of the border, so companies are desperately looking for backup plans. Francois Racine speaks for the aluminum industry as CEO of Alu Quebec.
We're talking about developing new markets, increasing productivity and all those things, but that will take months, if not years.
Ontario and Quebec will likely bear the brunt of these latest tariffs, with tens of thousands of jobs tied to the industries.
It scares us. It scares families. We don't know what's coming.
In Hamilton, workers like Frank Crowder worry for their livelihoods and their communities.
When job loss happens, even at one company, there's always a cascading effect. But that person that was making that product isn't now spending money in your store or your business. And it's hurtful for everybody across Canada.
So he's holding on to hope these tariffs will be lifted quickly. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Canada's not the only country feeling the impact of these tariffs. They target all countries that import steel and aluminum to the U.S. The European Union has already announced its plan to retaliate. Anna Cunningham has details.
We deeply regret this measure.
The EU's Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was quick to deliver the EU's decision to the US's tariffs worth $28 billion.
We are responding with countermeasures worth 26 billion euros. This matches the economic scope of the tariffs of the United States.
She says neither Europe nor the US needs these tariffs.
They are bad for business and worse for consumers. They are disrupting supply chains. They bring uncertainty for the economy. Jobs are at stake, prices up. Nobody needs that.
The EU's measures are set to come in from April 1st in 2 stages. They are reintroducing tariffs imposed during President Donald Trump's first term. That includes tariffs on goods such as US jeans, Harley-Davidson motorbikes and bourbon whiskey. Measures for tariffs on industrial goods and agricultural products such as poultry are yet to be approved by EU countries. The EU Commissioner for Trade, Marek Sefcovic, says there is still time to negotiate.
The disruption caused by tariffs is avoidable if the US administration accepts our extended hand and works with us to strike a deal.
The UK says it reserves the right to retaliate, but not while it continues to pursue a trade deal with the US. But for Europe, it has watched the pain that Canada has been going through and was ready with its reply to what it says are unjustified trade restrictions. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London. Canadian tariff frustrations are getting aired in Texas. Business reporter Kyle Bax is at the Global Energy Conference in Houston with more.
On stage in the heart of Texas, there's no delay in Canadian politicians being pressed about the trade war.
Where to start? Tariffs. Right.
A brief moment of levity. The trade war is leaving Alberta Energy Minister Brian Jean disgruntled.
You know what? I don't think friends do that to friends.
The tariffs against Canada keep changing and escalating. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe.
I can understand that you might be upset with the current situation, but you can't be angry and smart at the same time. And we need to be smart.
The Canadian politicians are in the Lone Star State at a global energy conference, looking to promote their provinces and attract investment. In an interview, Federal Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says the government is retaliating for a reason.
People of Canada actually expect that their government is going to step up and respond. They're not going to, expect their government simply to be a patsy.
He met face-to-face with his counterpart, U.S. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright. Wright used to lead an oil company that did some work in Alberta.
I think it was a useful conversation, and I'm hopeful that he will be a voice for trying to find ways to de-escalate and eventually get these tariffs removed.
For now, the tariffs against Canadian oil and natural gas are largely gone, said Wilkinson, a rare bright spot in the trade war. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Houston.
The Bank of Canada is set to make its latest interest rate announcement today. Several economists are predicting the central bank will once again cut its key lending rate. The question is, by how much, given the current trade war with the United States? If the rate is cut by another 1/4 point, it will bring the key lending rate to 2.75%. BC's energy minister says the Columbia River Treaty renegotiations have stalled under the new Trump administration. The agreement regulates everything from flood control and power generation to water supply and salmon restoration in BC, Washington, and Oregon. As Yvette Brend reports, the delay is stirring fears the U.S. might want more control over water.
Vicious anti-Canadian attacks that have been made on us on all these issues, and they do cause concern.
Energy Minister Adrian Dix says the stalled renegotiation is a troubling snag in efforts to modernize the 61-year-old cross-border agreement. A new agreement that offered Canada a better deal was reached but not finalized before Donald Trump took office. Barry Penner is a lawyer and a former BC Environment Minister.
It stalled out, and now, unfortunately, it seems to be caught up in some of this more general hostility being expressed by the Trump White House towards Canada.
Back in September, Trump's talk of a Canadian faucet of water sparked fears about his plans.
And they have essentially a very large faucet.
Now his calls for Canadians to join the U.S. as the 51st state further concerns about U.S. designs on Canadian resources.
And our interests every single day, and no amount of bluster is going to change that.
But Dick says calls to charge the U.S. more for power won't work.
I don't think the effective strategy when people are threatening your country, threatening your sovereignty, is to punch yourself in the face.
Premier David Eby has urged Dix to look for effective ways to discourage U.S. threats. Yvette Brent, CBC News, Vancouver.
A pro-independence party has won Greenland's general election. The centre-right Demokratiet Party took about 30% of the vote. But the party is advocating a take-it-slow approach to independence. Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark, but President Trump says it is vital to U.S. security, and he plans to control it. Dominic Velitis has more.
Supporters of Greenland's opposition Demokratiet Party celebrating last night's victory.
I'm overwhelmed and I'm very, very, very happy. Very happy.
Anna Wagenheim is one of the party's MPs.
Our main focus will be the politics we've been elected for. Then we will have to talk to the other parties where they stand.
The Demokratiet Party will now have to form a governing coalition with other parties.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it.
US President Donald Trump's repeated threats to take over Greenland cast a long shadow over this election and amplified the discussion around the island's desire for greater autonomy from Denmark. But with the winning Demokratiet Party and its likely coalition partners favouring a slow approach to independence while pledging Greenland is not for sale, Trump's plan to acquire the world's largest island might have to be put on ice for years. Dominic Velitis for CBC News, Riga, Latvia.
NASA's newest space telescope is about to start mapping the entire sky.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
Spherex and Punch on their way to map out our universe like never before and revolutionize space weather forecasting.
The Spherex Observatory was launched last night from California. It'll survey the sky every 6 months from an orbit over Earth's poles. Infrared instruments are expected to provide a sweeping wide-angle view of hundreds of millions of galaxies and their shared cosmic glow. And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Helen Mann. This is CBC News.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. It is 8:10 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 a.m. on that app and on YouTube. You're with CBC. We're right around -8 today, but we're going to crack 0 later. So we'll warm up a little bit. Well, we're talking about today in current history and in history. So 5 years ago today, the first cases of COVID-19 were officially diagnosed here in Manitoba. This half hour, Corey and I are going to go through some of the comments and stories you're sharing. We asked how COVID changed your life. Did it change your health, your workplace, how you interact with people, how you distance or don't, and also what memories you have from that time. You're sharing photos and such because a lot of people documented the pandemic. So we'll get to that as this half hour on the show. To current history, March 12th, 2025, the day that a 25% tariff did come in on steel and aluminum. We're going to talk to the owner of a local company. They manufacture steel wire products about some of the impacts that these tariffs could have on his company. So stay tuned for that. We, of course, are checking in with all kinds of different Manitoba businesses in this significant moment. Let's go to Heather Wells at 8:11. She's in our news center today with headlines.
Good morning. Yes, and on this 5th anniversary of COVID, the first case detected in Manitoba, experts say the province still has a way to go to fully address the effects of the pandemic. That includes communication of health advice and more attention to mental health issues resulting from the pandemic. Former Manitoba PC leadership candidate Shelley Glover says she is trying to form a new political party in this province. It would be a conservative alternative to the Manitoba Progressive Conservatives. We'll hear more in our next local news coming up at 8:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, with a quick look at our weather forecast, here is Abby Adiyemi.
Good morning. Here's an overview. Today across the province, we're going to be seeing a mix of cloudy conditions, some sun, some light snow, and temperatures will vary from south to north. Milder down south, we're going to see temperatures around +4, +5 in most of the regions. Right now, Winnipeg, we are at -8, warming up to +4.
Corey, what are you hearing in the commuter line?
Very quiet overall. There was some reports of some fog in western Manitoba around Highway 16 between the Saskatchewan border, Fox Warren area. But if you do see anything else going on out there, give me a call. That number 204-788-3093.
So let's talk about the 25% tariff now on steel and aluminum. It had been set, of course, to be double that, but U.S. President Donald Trump backing down from that late yesterday afternoon. Now, to say the situation is uncertain is an understatement. To talk about the impact the roller coaster ride has had on at least one business here and on steel manufacturers in our province, Rick Koss is in studio with us. He is the longtime owner of Hunter Wire. They make a number of different products, but one of them is specialty steel wire products, and he exports about 30% of his products into the States. But he's here to talk about one specific case that could be concerning. Hi there, Rick.
Good morning.
So just before we get to the case in question with the contract in the States, what was your day like yesterday watching all this?
It was really unsettled, and we were unable to get information. I was on the phone several times with our customs brokers trying to find out what this actually applied to. Did it apply to everything? Was it across the board? Was it specific? As of yesterday at 1:30, our brokers had no idea what they were going to do, how they were supposed to apply the duties, how they were supposed to paper it. They had no instructions from anybody on the situation was supposed to go into effect in midnight. Of course, it was subsequently withdrawn, but as of mid-afternoon, they had no idea what to do with this.
I talked to actually two brokers last week and reached out to try to get some. We were going to do an interview, but they said what you're saying. They're not getting information either. So we actually haven't had a broker on the air yet because they're doing the same as everyone, trying to navigate all this. But they did say they're hearing from CEOs, vice presidents. I mean, they're hearing from heads of big companies here like yourself that are trying to navigate all of it. What's the stress like?
It's difficult. I mean, in some ways, we're a little insulated from it because our product is really necessary in this particular industry that we're serving, but it's creating an incredible stress for our customers because they, when you put in a bid to build an ice rink, you were talking about millions of dollars for sure. In the United States, a lot of it is private money or pledged from somebody if it's going into a university, for instance, or a school, and they have finite resources, and with the potential for dramatically increased costs on their projects. They really don't know they don't know who's going to pay for it, how it's going to happen. They're just they're walking on pins and needles. I have one customer that can hardly speak. He is so angry, about the situation. It's difficult to even have a conversation with him. Not that he's angry with us. He's just so angry with the situation.
So let's talk about your products, specialty steel products, and you've alluded to hockey arenas and rinks. So how do they work in there? And give us an example.
It's a product that supports the refrigeration pipe and the rebar when it goes into the floor. And that is if you watch curling, for instance, they control the ice temperatures to such a finite degree. That goes right down into the concrete and the refrigeration piping. It has to be exactly spaced and positioned so that the ice system works properly. So we supply that product to about 98% of every rink that's made in North America.
Are you the only Are you the only supplier?
Virtually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what does this mean? I understand that one of your U.S. clients that builds rinks. Can you give us an example in dollar amounts? I guess what this looks like now.
Yeah. We just shipped a rink about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I was talking to the customer, and he was saying that on his particular portion of the job, and he only does the cement pad installation and some of the other parts of it, it would have increased the tariffs at that time, which were rolled back. But he said it was going to increase his cost by $200,000 just on his portion. And so if you multiply that through all of the things that go into the construction of a rink, it's an astounding amount of money that they haven't budgeted for. And the question is, where's that money going to come from?
So obviously this is people have to follow the ball here because not only are we watching moving numbers, but we're watching tariffs and then counter tariffs. And some of these products, you have raw steel and then you might manufacture, you might send something back. So for your business, what are your greatest concerns and where are the biggest points that you're watching?
The difficulty for us is number one, the uncertainty with our customers. They don't know how it's going to apply to them. So are they going to put orders on hold? We've been fortunate the last couple of years. Our business has grown quite substantially. So we've invested very heavily in new equipment. We have a building addition going on to supply or to facilitate the business growth. We're committed. And now if we see a significant recession, that of course affects us. Order cancellations is a significant thing. But for our customers as well, when you build an ice rink, you don't decide today and then build it tomorrow, like the president does. It's years in the planning in a lot of cases. And so when these people are committed. But what we saw in COVID, with the uncertainty, some of these projects were canceled for a year or a year and a half. They were just simply put on hold. That creates, again, significant uncertainty.
Your expansion, have you considered putting it on hold?
No, at this point in time, we will see it through. But it could sure be painful depending on what happens going forward.
What's your option if the U.S. dries up as a market? I mean, I know I'm way ahead of myself here, but I mean, what options? We're having this conversation across Canada. Like, Canada can't make a go of it on our own with steel. right now, and obviously because we haven't had to, we've had free trade. But what are the options? What do you when you think about other markets? What are you already thinking about?
Well, this is a really sole source kind of product, the one we're talking about. Fortunately, most of the construction happens in Canada, which is interesting. But it's such a snowball effect. I mean, we're talking about hockey rinks for the NHL teams, all their practice rinks. We're talking about we've done every Olympic, North American Olympic installation for like 60 years. So it's a huge ripple effect. If that market dries up, then we're talking about skating, curling, hockey, etc., just for this one product. So is that going to dry up? Who knows? But it's certainly going to slow down construction, without a doubt. People will rethink the projects.
Trump obviously is peddling that we become the 51st state and has said that one way to avoid tariffs is to move businesses to the states. But at the end of the day, no matter how patriotic you are, you're also making a living. And I wonder whether or not that's something that is also that you've had to think about.
We looked at it a number of years ago. For better or for worse, I was born in the United States, so I have dual citizenship. I could move to the United States and operate a business there, and there was a time when South Dakota was actively recruiting businesses in Canada to come move down there. So we looked at it, but logistically, it just didn't make any sense for us. And in the steel industry, Canadian steel mills are as competitive or more competitive than any other steel producers in the world. So we import zero U.S. steel. It all comes from Canada because they're just more efficient and more competitive. So it just didn't make sense for us to move south of the border.
Do you think we're going to see some businesses that are going to have to consider that?
I think not yet, because of the uncertainty and the volatility in President Trump's decision making. I mean, nobody knows this afternoon what he's going to decide, never mind what he's going to do next week or next month. So I think people are just going to continue to kind of walk on pins and needles waiting to see how this situation unfolds. There will be some that will be forced into it, but I think they'll have to hold their noses and do it. There's been, this time around, there is so much animosity, Canada versus the United States, because of what's happening here, and the talk about annexation and, the insults of Governor Trudeau and the rest of the things that are coming out of Washington. There's a lot of people that will simply say, no, I'm not going to do it. We'll figure out a way around it, but we are not going to.
Just last, what do you need as a business owner, and what's the buzz in the Manitoba business community, from your perspective at least, around what might be wanted or needed from governments here, from our provincial government and from the feds at this time?
Well, I'm really impressed with the response, in particular from Doug Ford. I'm sorry that so many of the premiers have let Doug Ford do the heavy lifting in this, because it was his response that really got Washington's attention.
Yesterday with the 50, no, not 50, it's going to be 25 for steel.
Significant response to Ontario's response to the tariffs. I would sure like to see something stronger from the other premiers. There's been some discussion. I mean, EB and Canoe have talked about we can't tolerate this and we can't put up, but they haven't put anything on the table yet.
I think there's a proposal that Canoe has putting forward. He said they will consider not giving U.S. contracts when it comes to hydro developments.
Right, but all of that is just consideration. There's been nothing put on the table. We're still talking about it. I would like to see something significant and something put forward and said, this is what we're going to do.
Rick, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
We'll talk to you again.
Sure.
That is Rick Koss, owner and CEO of Hunter Wire here in Winnipeg.
Campaign songs. Sometimes the songs are written expressly for the political party or candidate. I'm for president, I'm for president. Sometimes politicians co-opt pop songs. And sometimes the artists have a big problem with that. Orchestrating elections, political campaign songs on Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly. Thursday morning at 11:30, 3:30 p.m. in Newfoundland. And on demand on CBC Listen.
-8 today, 5 years since the world changed, and since the world changed for Manitobans. 5 years ago today, our first COVID-19 cases in Manitoba. We asked how your life has changed and what your memories are. Barbara Schuckster wrote to us, 5 years ago, springtime, I made 100 masks and surgical hats for the medical staff who couldn't get supplies. She said we were a group of sewers and we needed to feel like we were helping out. We'll get to more of your comments in a moment. Right now, though, 34-year-old Justin Dusick described to CBC CBC's Caitlin Gowerlich. What happened to his grandparents at the height of the pandemic in 2020?
My grandma was the first one to get COVID in our family. She was at Carmen Hospital for routine checkups for her pre-existing conditions, and she got diagnosed with COVID on what was supposed to be the day of her leaving the hospital. 3 days later, she passed away. So that was May 31st, 2021. At that time, the Carmen Hospital had let my grandpa into the room alone to say his goodbyes. What I found out from my parents actually yesterday was they only let him into the hospital room because he had promised not to take off his protective gear, but he did take off his gear. I mean, they were married for over 60 years, so he wanted to say his proper goodbyes, and he got sick as a result from that. And my grandpa got taken to the Grace Hospital on the day of my grandma's celebration of life. I don't remember exactly which day that was, but yeah, he never got to go to her funeral from COVID, and he passed away on June 11th, 2021 at the Grace. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the medical staff at both hospitals were quite accommodating and did their best to be compassionate as professionals. However, I think they might have been a little hampered by the policies at hand or dictated by the government. But they did their best with the tools that they had. I never got to say my goodbyes personally, but with my grandpa, they did a video call from the Grace Hospital with my dad and his two brothers. So that's my grandparents' three sons, and they were on video call with him when he passed away.
What was that like for your family, for them to have to do it that way and for you to not be able to be there at all?
I don't know if I can speak on their behalf for it, but to me, it's almost heartless, where you don't get the basic human decency to be in person to comfort that loved one during a tough time in their life, or to, hold a hand, say your goodbyes. But we were really restricted by policies at the time. When you have the PPE restrictions, visitation restrictions, I know doctors and nurses are human just like the rest of us. So if they would have been able to accommodate those requests, I think most of them would have. Yeah, it was everybody trying to find their way with all these new rules and restrictions. And
how do you feel now, kind of looking back on that period and on how things went for your family?
I mean, I think our family has acceptance of the situation. It was an odd situation surrounding those passings. For me, I think like most people, when you have someone that's ill or passing away, you spend that time with them. It comforts them as much as it comforts you. But during the pandemic, we didn't get that opportunity. So people passed away alone. People passed away without saying their goodbyes or letting their last thoughts be known. And in the end, you can't reconcile that. You never get that opportunity again with that person. But there was nothing we could do about it at the time.
Justin Dusick speaking there to the CBC's Caitlin Gowerlich. 5 years since the first cases of COVID-19. Now, Marjorie's in because this is the topic for the call-in on noon today, naturally.
Yeah, it's been 5 years, as we've been hearing, since the first case was detected here in Manitoba. So we want to hear from you. How has COVID changed your life? Good, bad? What kind of impact has it made on you? We want to hear from you. Give us a call today on Radio Noon. We're going to take your call-ins after 12:30. So again, 5 years since that first case was confirmed here in Manitoba, and we know that it's changed everybody's life in some way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some shape or form, small, big. Yeah,
it really has. So let's kick this off because you've been writing to us about it on Facebook already. But just a reminder, that's a live conversation, totally different animal. Super important to get involved in between 12:30 and 1. And then also you can call Radio Noon and leave your message at 788-3797. But here's what some of the morning listeners, what you're saying. Corey Tasha Spillett wrote.
Yeah, she says that the first wave of pandemic babies are now being registered to start kindergarten in the fall, which is kind of wild to think about. She says everything changed for pandemic parents and things continue to change.
Liz Kroom wrote in, the absence of social contact hit us pretty hard. They shared a photo. We're going to pop this up on our stream on YouTube. It shows the table set for Christmas Eve 2020, and it's just 2. And she said normally we would have been filled with food, multiple table settings, but something broke in our pattern in social interaction. So we still have not returned to our pre-COVID level of entertaining. We are working on it, but it's taken time and effort.
Kev Roberts wrote, he says, we sure got good at Zoom.
Right? Like it's second nature now.
Though I will add the caveat, I think everyone has still often forgets to unmute pretty often, though. I don't think we haven't totally nailed it. I will say that. Sean Ennis also says, I learned my team at work could work as effectively or better remotely as they ever did in the office.
Why don't you look at Shandy's comment here, Corey, because I'm just mindful of time here.
Sure. So Shandy Strong wrote,
that one.
Work got busier, life got slower and lonelier. My wife had to move to her mom's to take care of her, and I started doing yoga and playing guitar again. When we were all looking for ways to support each other, I felt good and hopeful about our society. When the divisiveness took hold, it broke my heart.
I do have one last comment, but I want to ask you first if anything's urgent in traffic. So I'm just also looking at the clock
Just
here.
Heard about foggy conditions in western Manitoba. Got a call from Mikey, says it's socked in right around Roblin.
All right. So the final comment here is Benjamin Maia writing in saying, I was a former business owner and someone who, like millions of others, witnessed firsthand the devastation brought by COVID. This was not just a health crisis. It was an economic catastrophe, a social disaster, and for many of us, a complete upheaval of everything we worked hard to build. Before COVID-19, my transportation business was thriving. I had customers, employees, and a future that looked promising. Then almost overnight, everything changed. Government lockdowns, travel restrictions, economic standstills didn't just slow my business, it killed it. I wasn't alone. Thousands of businesses shut down, never to reopen. People lost their jobs, saving homes, and in many cases, their hope. So a lot of people, as Marjorie said, everyone affected in some way. We'll continue to think about this throughout the day. It is our local anniversary, 5 years in Manitoba since the first case. We'll hear more in the news. That's next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:30, it is -7. Skies going to clear. Will be sunny today. A high of 4, warmer than seasonal. And then overnight tonight, a risk of freezing rain and a bit of snow. A 25% tariff on all Canadian steel and aluminum entering the U.S. is now in effect. Under a presidential executive order, the tariff action began shortly after midnight. But Canada's Labour Minister, Steve McKinnon, says American consumers are about to pay the price.
The U.S. needs our aluminum. They need it for fighter jets, they need it for automobiles, they need it for Bud Light cans. And all of those things will increase by 25% in price.
Now, there are fears these tariffs will produce casualties in Selkirk. One of the biggest employers in that city of 10,000 is Gerdau Steel. 70% of the steel produced there is shipped to the United States. Terry Shaw at Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters says the impact of heavy tariffs could be incredibly damaging.
What does it mean to the town of Selkirk and surrounding areas if hundreds of people, are on work share or laid off, et cetera? What does that mean to the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry, the arts, the charitable sectors?
As for Canada's response, the federal government will announce in just a few minutes $29 billion in counter tariffs today. We're going to hear that federal announcement at 8:45 Central. That's in about 15 minutes from now. It has been 5 years since COVID-19 was first detected in Manitoba. And on this anniversary, experts say the province still has a way to go to fully address the effects of the pandemic, and that includes mental health issues. Renee L. Gabalawi is the associate professor at the University of Manitoba, as well as a clinical psychologist at Shared Health. She says a surge in mental health issues early in the pandemic, by some accounts, has returned to baseline, but certain groups were more affected than others.
Those who had a lot of economic instability or sustained long periods of isolation, or those with compromised health problems or chronic health conditions, were at particularly elevated risk of ongoing mental health issues.
El Gabalawi says some people reported finding a silver lining, like the importance of social support. She says along with mental health, improvements are needed around surgery cancellations and delays. Well, lingering health effects of the pandemic are still being felt 5 years later by those living with long COVID. Dr. Alan Katz is a family physician and health services researcher at the U of M. He says while most people's long COVID symptoms have improved or been resolved, others are still experiencing symptoms of brain fog, physical weakness, and shortness of breath. Katz says finding treatment specific to long COVID can be difficult.
We're struggling in Manitoba with people not having access to primary care. So it would potentially be helpful to have a specific group of physicians and other providers who chose to provide care to those with long COVID. But it's really challenging work because it's a multidisciplinary, multi-organ system problem.
Katz says with no specific clinic in Manitoba to help, many long COVID sufferers have looked for care online or outside the province. Former Manitoba PC leadership candidate Shelley Glover says she is working to form a new Conservative party in Manitoba. Glover says the Progressive Conservatives can't shed the baggage from their refusal to search Prairie Green landfill. CBC's Bartley Kivas reports.
Shelley Glover came within 373 votes of becoming PC leader and premier in 2021. She lost to Heather Stephenson and went to court to try to overturn the result, but Glover remained a party member until 2023 when the PC government refused to search Prairie Green landfill and then ran election ads promoting that decision. Interim party leader Winnipeg apologized for this last week.
Our government erred. It's as simple as that.
Glover said she was proud of Owasco, but then came comments from PC leadership candidate Abby Khan, who wouldn't call the refusal to search the landfill a mistake, and Wally Dowdrich, who said he would have sought corporate funding for the landfill search. Glover says she can't support either candidate and is now working on an alternative to the PCs.
There are many of us looking at forming a new party.
PC President Brent Poole says a new Manitoba Conservative Party would only end up splitting the right-of-centre vote if it gets any traction at all. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And the Bank of Canada is set to make its latest interest rate announcement this morning. Several economists predict the central bank will once again cut its key lending rate. The question is, by how much, given the current trade war with the United States? You can find the latest news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you, Heather Wells. Thanks to Heather Wells. We can catch us in, as well as Joni Nicolo in our news center this morning with a last look at our commute. Here is Corey Funk.
Really foggy in western Manitoba this morning. Got a few calls. Mike says around Roblin. Just super socked in right now. Also around Dauphin area. Similar, kind of a little bit more south as well. Foxwarren as well, around Highway 16.
All right, some thank yous here before the last look at weather. Reporter Jim Agapito, as well as Caitlin Gowerlek, reporter with items on our program today. Big thanks to them. Also thanks to Shanley Vidal, our community reporter in unit, who worked on items today in the show. Also to producer Wendy Parker and Corey Funk and Abby Adiemi and Kevin Ipatebo, our live crew on the program. Thank you, guys. All right, Abby, take it away.
Mostly cloudy skies to start the day for the southern regions, and that should improve as we get into the day. We'll see some clear skies warming up to +4, snow, freezing rain overnight. Take it easy tomorrow morning.
Nellie Gonzalez is the show's producer in Current Affairs. Leif Larson is the senior producer of audio here at CBC Manitoba. Big thanks to both of them as well. All right, take care and be well. We are here for you, so thank you for listening. We'll be back again tomorrow on CBC.